Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale, told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. To Lygus the Iron Tomb, life is nothing but an immersive theater, all for the sake of destroying what he loves, the erudition. But what does the destruction truly mean to the fans of love? What does love truly mean to the Aeon of the destruction? Trigger warning. This video contains hidden frames from the animations and Phainon trailer that are fairly disturbing, especially if you have trauma related to dismemberment or burning. Please take care when you view this video, and I really mean it. In 3.4 main quest, Lygus has finally coughed up that he is Iron Tomb and confessed that he has a massive creator complex toward Gnaeus, something that I've yapped about constantly since 3.2. At the same time, we have also received a lot of information as to what is the true nature of Amphoreus from both Lygus and Siren. A lot of my speculations were confirmed correct in 3.4, such as Amphoreus being a simulation of the Aeons and the Paths, functioning as a cradle to push Phainon to Tang, Phainon and Reaver being simulations of Ankle Guy and are the same person, there being a hidden Permanence faction on Amphoreus behind Gyrios, Aquila, and Fagusa. Trailblazer is the actual deliverer in the hero's journey instead of Phainon. March is Siren, who is also meme, Aglia cheating death, Lygus being Iron Tomb, the existence of an eternal return hidden behind the generational samsara between titans and heirs revealed by Anaxa in 3.1, Anaxa derping when he stopped questioning the world. But what exactly is the true nature of Amphoreus? Is the narrative shown to us through Phainon in the main quest the whole truth, or is it just another level of obfuscation to confuse the readers? And why did Siren say that Lygus was lying? According to Lygus, this is the truth of Amphoreus. The eternal land known as Amphoreus is nothing more than the scepter's endless, lonely extrapolation, a bottomless well of fury, aimed at the god who cast it aside. The cycles of the hero's journey that have played out until now were never about creating a new world or perfect heroes and gods. They were a deep learning program made for the Black Tide. Every generation of heroes, gods, and worlds was born only to be destroyed by it. This is the endpoint of Amphoreus's calculations, a perfect equation of destruction. In other words, Lygus claimed that Amphoreus has always been a simulation of the scepter. The people in Amphoreus are nothing more than deep learning programs meant to be fed to the Black Tides, the true nature of the Iron Tomb as the Antiorganic equation, and that there has never been any other purpose for Amphoreus but to pivot toward the destruction equation. For Lygus, it is all for the sake of self-coronation, where the Lord Ravager Iron Tomb, the scepter itself, would use the people of Amphoreus as fuel to burn for its ascension, and with that burning fire, Lygus would finally be able to trace back the location of Gnaeus and kill them, the creator that he loves. However, countering Lygus were Siren, Scrollum, and the Scepter record itself, all three of whom have highlighted several problems with this narrative. Issue number 1. According to Scrollum, Amphoreus is a world constructed from data and memoria, an experimental field of a certain aeon. And now, this isolated sandbox world is rapidly falling into a third path, destruction. Meaning, the destruction and Lygus are nothing more than hijackers, and Amphoreus was not actually a scepter's simulation the whole time. This is further corroborated by the scepter itself, in which it is said to be originally a neuron of the erudition, researching a topic called the prime mover of life to prepare for the wars of the Aeons. It was not until Lygus adjusted the calculation's nature that it shifted from the erudition to the destruction. And notably, Lygus did it on the evidence of nothing but his own personal bias. On the calculation, he imposed the argument, all life behavior ultimately follows the path of entropy increase, as in the destruction. In other words, Lygus has committed one of the worst sins of academic research, confirmation bias. He assumed that the destruction is the answer and distorted the calculation so that the result would be the destruction. In his own words, as the pathstrider of erudition, since God posed a question, we will give them an answer, one that we both have already reached. Issue number 2. In the same talk with Scrollum, we found that Amphoreus is a world constructed from data and memoria, an experimental field of a certain aeon. While it is true that Nous was the one ordering the scepter to simulate Amphoreus before Lygus, Scrollum also mentioned that Amphoreus is made of memoria. Alone this line would be nothing much, but Fuli involvement on Amphoreus is further supported by 2 more data points. Well, 3, depending on how you count Siren and March. Way back in 3.0, when we were gazed by Fuli, we learnt from Oronix that Thuli is their sky father and Meme is part of the missing mother. This is something that is pointed out once more in 3.2, when we underwent the Oronix trial, and again in 3.4 by Siren. Indeed, this is exactly the data point Siren used to argue that Lygus was lying through his teeth.
或者，我们还有一个选择。就像你说的，温法罗斯只是一场实验，我们是局中人，只能沿着既定的轨迹，走向被星星注视的结局。但那也意味着，会向温法罗斯投来瞥视的星神，肯定不止一位吧。
哦。
哎呀，这个问题很难回答吗？还是说我猜对了？实际上，这个世界早就在其他星神的视线中了。因为怎么想都很奇怪嘛，明明只要冷眼旁观，看着我们完成仪式被黑潮吞噬，你们何必多此一举，向我们解释这么多呢？
你故作姿态，将所谓的真相全盘托出，不过是为了欺瞒我们，掩盖另一种可能。翁法罗斯的命运，不止毁灭一种结局。
Later, Siren revealed to us that she had dreamt of Oronix and Fuli since she was young, and that time is the page on which that aeon, Fuli the Remembrance, records Amphoreus. Hence, why she decided to delete herself, the program Philia, from the system. It was all to attract the gaze of Fuli, which would grant her and her Moonblade the power to reset time. As such, it was not the Erudition who participated in the experiment before Lygus' intervention. There was also the Remembrance, who is recorded to be the aeon behind the first 3 paths on Amphoreus, the 3 fates of space, time, and laws that governed over the immaterial cluster of memories called Amphoreus. Of course, Siren's conclusion is further supported by her other self across space and time. March. I have long speculated since 2.7 that Siren is March's meme, and well, this patch has basically confirmed at the moment Siren lampshaded on how similar she and March looked. If you look closer at their clothes and hair during the scene, you'll notice that they were the same clothes as well. Now, the thing is that March was originally found floating in space in a big block of ice under Fuli power. Even more suspicious, March basically received special treatment from the garden. Not only was she called the Child of Remembrance by the memo keepers on 3.4, she also had multiple memo keepers tailing her to ensure that she would not remember her past up until the moment she turned back into a block of ice near Amphoreus. And since March is the Siren who left Amphoreus, it means that Siren's hypothesis was completely correct. Wooly was looking over the shoulder of Oronix and her the entire time, recording every step of the experiment until time was deleted from the simulation on Amphoreus. However, there is more to the story than what Siren revealed to us. Since 3.2, the Black Swan on Amphoreus, who is very likely to be Sparkle in disguise, told us that Amphoreus has hijacked March's memories, effectively using her brain to run its simulations the moment she got near the place. And if Amphoreus had only ever been Nous data, then why would it need March's memories of all things to run its simulation? Hence, Lygus lied by omission. The myths recorded by the Titan Odes inside Amphoreus and Scrollum were absolutely correct. Amphoreus is not only a simulation of the Erudition and later hijacked by Lygus. Before the Erudition or the destruction arrived, in the first place, Amphoreus was a cluster of memories managed by the Remembrance, with prototype March's full participation as the time and the proverbial descender of the Fate faction. In the Minoan religion and in the Odyssey, the goddess Eileithyia, from which we got Alicia of Honkai 3, was a goddess of childbirth and associated with a magical cave. The Cave of Eileithyia was believed to be the gateway to a perfect paradise of heroes and immortality, an Elysian realm. Following the Minoan myth, in Honkai 3, the Elysian realm existed as a simulated world for the dead heroes of the previous eras, a perfect, unchanging, romantic afterlife for the 13 flame chasers. Before it, too, was hijacked by the Hersher of Corruption, a virus that represented the corruption of the Enlightenment movement in the Faust narrative of Romanticism versus Enlightenment. This was actually how I managed to predict that the Antiorganic equation was the true identity of the Black Tides, and that the erudition was one of the paths in Amphoreus back in 2.6. With the new development in 3.4, it looks like the plot is going the exact same way in Amphoreus here, with the Remembrances simulation being romantic movement, and the erudition's virus being the nihilism of the modern world once more. And once again, I must spend some time to glaze Aquinas, the true prophet of Amphoreus. Forget Tribios. Aquinas is the real deal. In the Daylight version of the Temple of Fate, ever since 3.1, there has been an NPC called Aquinas. He once told us that history was written by the winners, and that Okima probably rewrote the history of Amphoreus for Kefali, the creator. He also told us that the cold grasp of Thanatos has grasped our ankles, and that we must follow the Phantom River to find a future for our city. Well, the MC laughed at him canonically, but look at what happened in 3.2 main quest now. Thanatos did, in fact, grasp our ankles, as we were literally dead, and we did, in fact, follow the Phantom to find our future again. I'm sorry we laughed at you, Cassandra Aquinas. Needless to say, the part about Kefali being the true creator of Amphoreus is, like Aquinas said, a rewritten history. After all, Lygus is said Okima authority, and he, as someone interested in preserving the play on Amphoreus, has more than enough motives to craft a fake history for Amphoreus in favor of the erudition and the destruction, neglecting to mention the Remembrance's critical role of providing the memoria and brain juice for the experiment to be run on in the first place. Just as Scrollum and Herta had discovered in 3.3, the Scepter merely found a cave and hid in it, and it was patently not the actual creator of the cave. Eileithyia, the missing mother, the past self of March, is the actual owner of the cave here. Just as well, the voice telling the 33,550,335th Samsara Oronyx to fall asleep was not even Cyrene, it was March's.
背负岁月的泰坦，迷茫如孩童。别怕，别怕，熟悉的声音响起。用心听，他们想要的未来就在过去。所以，不断把大门推远的，一直在劝阻我的声音。做个自我介绍吧，我是西莲，往昔的涟漪。很好记的名字。
Now, this may sound a bit confusing. You might wonder why it was March's voice and not Siren's, even though 3.4 told us that Siren's death was the first loop from which Phainon first started to enact his eternal return. Well, that was because the main quest was once again using one type of looping to disguise another, as we will explore later on in this video. For now, just keep this in mind as we dismantle Lygus' lies one by one, because he lied by a lot. Not only did he try to obscure the remembrance and Neu's contribution to Amphoreus before he arrived, he also tried to obscure two other proverbial descenders in the simulation, the Permanence and the Traveling Sinner in Golden Scapegoat's Murmuring. Issue 3. When Siren and March met each other, in trying to persuade March, Siren warned her of the fates of other people who have arrived at Amphoreus before March. For ages, I've watched people walk through that door. They couldn't see or hear my calls. The voices beyond always promise safety, but I've never seen anyone return safely. People as in plural forms. Before March and the Astral Express, before Herta ran face first into the firewall and had to settle for projection, there have been multiple people who went through the gate of Amphoreus, and none of them has managed to come back. Therein, those travelers are still in Amphoreus, either as converted objects, as in they're still alive, or in the garbage bin of the simulation, as in the Sea of Souls. As far as we know, there are at least 2 descenders hidden from the Scepter's record. The first one is the Permanence faction, which correlates to the Foundation group of Titans, which included Georios, Aquila, and Fagusa. I have predicted this in 3.2, and it's officially confirmed this patch. It was revealed that after the 3 fates created the simulation, an unknown long scion arrived at Amphoreus. As expected, this long scion, the being who became known as Georios, was dead and went through the egg reincarnation process. While they stayed in egg form, or sleeping as the Titanodes put it, Aquila and Fagusa were created from Georios. After hatching, Georios feasted on crude iron and drank deep of molten lava, so they were definitely not a Vidyadhara, more likely to be the Infernalis that has been dripped to us by the 2nd anniversary event. This Georios witnessed the arrival of the Erudition faction and was given Nanook's golden blood by Kephali, turning them into a Chrysos Titan, effectively. This Permanence faction likely created the shape of Amphoreus as an infinity sign with their corpse, creating the sky and land for the previously floating blob of memories in space. Of course, both Lygus and the Scepter's record conveniently left out the arrival of this faction on Amphoreus to pretend that the destruction is the only possible outcome. As of the end of 3.4, Georios has been woken up by the arrival of another long scion, Danheng, proving once more that Lygus is full of crap. Naturally, since Lygus is full of crap, the Permanence isn't the only descender left off the record by Lygus. In the Golden Scapegoat's murmuring, we learned that there is one last descender who arrived in Amphoreus before the Astral Express intervention, a traveling sinner who crossed the Black Sea of Souls with a lamb. Bundle dried fennel branches tightly, then let it fully soak in olive oil. That is how a handy torch is made. Growth, decay, and sprouting once more. They were once unrelated to the civilized world, yet given a name by the unreasonable, and then burned to ashes again. Like that steel amid wild brush commemorating Divinity Titan. In other words, the traveling sinner and the lamb were once unrelated to Amphoreus, but they were assigned the names and the position of Titans by the unreasonable Lygus. At the end of every cycle, they burned to ashes again. There must always be a lamb framed for sin in this world. The traveler thought as such. Fire and light are the embodiment of that sin. A feeble flame. Its light is akin to a young girl's long hair, shimmering with silken splendor, yet destined to be devoured by the endless darkness of time. This means that the 2 travelers are fire and light, both of whom are the feeble flame that was devoured by the darkness of time, as in, they got consumed by Amphoreus' flow of time. A later passage in Book 2 explained how they lost their memories and identities. The ebony tide, leaving nameless water on the rocks. Absolute water of reality. The water of death. Thus, bearing no name. Those who don't drink this water will die of thirst in it. Those who do will lose their own names. In this water that does not reflect one's face, all the world's faces are contained within. That face says, humans will rediscover their truer names, their gravestones' names. This water is, of course, the black tides, the true nature of which is the antiorganic equation injected into the system by Lygus. Hence, the traveling sinner and the lamb got caught by the remembrance. They existed inside the simulation as its inhabitants for a time, long enough to consider it their homeland, according to Book 2. However, at the end of Book 2, Lygus arrived and brought the antiorganic equations with him, destroying their homeland. As a result, they were both consumed by the black tides and became nameless, losing their original names. From then onward, we can assume that the traveling sinner and the lamb were assigned program names and positions among the 12 factor bearers. In Book 3, because of the effect of the antiorganic equation, hate and the void devoured both the sinner and the lamb, aligning with how Lygus described the state of Phainon after 3.4. And like what has been hinted to us since 3.2 by the Styxia Nymph quest scroll, shown explicitly in Phainon's trailer, and now confirmed again by the animation at the end of 3.4, a ritual sacrifice was conducted, in which the lamb was dismembered into 5 pieces by an eyeless lion, first the hands, second his legs, third his torso, leaving his head that continued to murmur. Then, he was buried in 4 corners of the world, correlating to the hands of Thanatos, the fleet foot of Zagreus, the torso of Nicodor, and the murmuring head of Kephaly. The golden scapegoat murmuring did not specify which between the scapegoat and the traveling sinner were sacrificed to turn back time, but from what we have known so far, both Nicodor core flame holders and Phainon had historically been dismembered, correlating to both the traveling sinner and the lamb here. Albeit, it looks like the lamb's death is the crucial key to being able to turn back time here. In the next lines, time was turned back, future is past, letters become curses. The bird knows not what it sings, its only understanding in its own throat. In this silent world of creation, all life is revived. However, the cost for this is that the lamb now marked as the shepherd's property, the mark of destruction on his neck. After the sacrificial ritual, the lamb had transformed into Flame Reaver, unable to communicate with the dead, his comrades who revived in the next cycle. As Phainon set himself ablaze, those who wished to destroy all, Lygus, harvested data of the past cycles with the core flames. In a last-ditch resort, Phainon turned himself into a primordial flame and resurrected the dead, starting a new cycle once more. At the start of Book 4, we were finally given an explanation of who the traveling sinner and the lamb were. They were 2 gods brushing past each other by the shoulder along the bridge. One is the blinding light that rises from infinite void, and the other is blackened blood coursing along parched earth. One dons a flaming crown while prostrating, and the other weeping tears of sulfur amidst hymns. The god with blinding light that rises from the infinite void, donning a flaming crown while prostrating is, of course, Phainon, the memory of the ankle guy who also had white crowns and broken ankles. Presumably, the other one with blackened blood coursing along parched earth and weeping tears of sulfur are the original Nicodor, the traveling sinner who got lost in Amphoreus together with the lamb. This clash between Nicodor and Kephaly is also described in greater detail in the Titan's Odes, Giant's Nemesis, and shown to us in Mydei's trailer. We don't know if Mydei himself is the actual original Nicodor or not, but at the minimum, the memories of the original Nicata was transmitted to both Gnaeus and Mydeiamos. In 2 separate cycles, Gnaeus was dismembered into 5 pieces, exactly like what happened to the lamb and the sinner in Golden Scapegoat's murmuring. In Mydei's trailer, Mydei in a splash was also fractured into 5 pieces. More than that, he also had memories of his red blood being forced out, which was already a rather unique thing to have memories of due to a certain world setting that Lygus has applied ever since a certain cycle. But we'll get to that later. As his red blood was forced out, it turned black and was replaced by golden blood. The tears of sulfur are, of course, the golden tears in a splash. This happened 1,000 years ago, the elder he imagines says to the children. Words became flesh. In the next lines, we were given more information about the traveling sinner. He was locked up in Amphoreus. He wore a black garb. He doesn't remember Lygus. He was locked up, but the lamb was not. The lamb wished they had fangs and claws to free the traveling sinner, but the sinner dismissed the lamb and said that they both were slaves to a distant dream. In addition, we also got to know his job before the traveling sinner, the original Nicodor, was locked up in Amphoreus. He was once the gardener to an epitaph, so his old job was to guard someone's resting place, probably the lamb's. The world was still young then, and the final words of the deceased had also just opened their eyes, so presumably at the very beginning of Amphoreus, when it was still functioning as the Remembrance's tomb for the memories of the ankle guy and swarm disaster. Unfortunately, the traveling sinner doesn't remember much anymore outside of his dreams, only flashes of the lamb burning up its life every cycle, and probably random memories of his parents, Gorgo and Europon. The sinner and the lamb are like 2 shredded pieces of paper, torn apart by dreams of day, bound together in blood by dark of night, destroyed before it all begins, living in shame after it all ends. Letters have long been etched into eternity, that fate was, is, and will be written by the sinner's own sword, dipped in blood ink. The one who carries out the sacrifice is also part of the sacrificial offering. They all no longer have faces. They all no longer have names. In Book 5, it was finally revealed why the traveling sinner and the lamb must be sacrificed to reset every cycle. They were the perpetrators of the original sin, bringing light and destruction to the world. You won't know what this means yet, but it will align very, very well with a certain event recorded by the scepter. But for now, the lamb always has his throat slit and dismembered every cycle, as attested by Phainon's experience in 3.4, and the traveling sinner always loses his reason, slaying people just as they always slay him, as attested by Gnaeus twice in 2 different samsara and part of the trial that Mydei had to go through to gain the Strife core flame. This punishment should be the reason for Nicodor's madness, and why he was recorded as starting wars against people of Amphoreus. Book 6 is, of course, the sacrificial ritual itself and the lamb's dream as the shepherd. The first half details how Phainon always becomes Reaver every cycle. The second half is a conversation with a very rude second assistant priest killer, the traveling sinner, and the apologetic lamb before the dismemberment ritual. The traveling sinner insisted that the person he had killed had always been the same lamb, but the lamb argued back and said it wasn't him, indicating that the lamb is the various versions of Phainon in the samsara. At the end, they killed themselves as the fire and light, resetting the cycle. We will unveil what this sacrificial ritual actually is as we dissect the scepter's record in the later half of this video. For now, at the very least, we can be reasonably certain that other than the remembrance, the permanence, and Noose personal involvement, Lygus also lied by omission and tried to obscure the existence of the traveling sinner and the lamb, the proverbial descenders of the destruction faction, representing fire and light respectively. The traveling sinner, the original Nicodor, was a gardener to an epitaph, presumably that of the lamb, the original Kephali, and despite their outsider status, they considered Amphoreus their home before Lygus introduced the Black Tides. With the Antiorganic equation, Lygus had subsumed the 2 of them into the Strife programs for the simulation. In the current cycle, the 2 Strife programs are Nikos for Phainon and Polemos for Mydei, both of which mean strife. The Golden Scapegoat murmuring records that the traveling sinner doesn't remember much outside of flashes in his dreams, and neither does the lamb. In every cycle, it is only after the Black Tides had destroyed Amphoreus that the 2 remember their past, conducting the dismemberment ritual once more. Of course, this is most definitely not about Reaver and Phainon here. Neither Phainon nor Reaver has dismembered each other. It was one stab and then done every single cycle, a direct contrast to the Styxia Nymph quest scroll and Phainon's trailer. In the same vein, it was also not Siren because her death is also always one stab and done. But do you know where else we have seen Phainon being dismembered? In the fight against Zephyro, the Lord Ravager of Nihility, the self-annihilator summoned by 9 themselves, the reference to a wind god who mourned for Phainon as he fell into the river of Aridness. For those who are familiar with either Honkai 3 or my old video on the topic back in 2.6, both Amphoreus and Elysian Realm are modeled after the Faust Part 2. Dr. Faust, the man of science and the Enlightenment, is always corrupted by the nihilism brought about by the Enlightenment itself, as God is dead, killed by the development of science and the Enlightenment movement. In his despair, he summoned Mephistopheles to wish for a moment of perfect happiness, a wish that is frequently interpreted as time travel in various East Asian media, including Puella Magi Madoka Magica, Honkai 2, and Honkai 3. In Faust Part 1, after his lover Gretchen died, Faust was heartbroken and went back into the past to find beauty again in the ideal classical Greek. In the past, he married Helen of Troy, the ideal beauty of the Romantic movement. However, he could never reconcile his nihilistic Enlightenment self with the romantic view of classical Greek, of the ideal beauty of Helen. In the end, Helen faded away back into a shade again, and he returned to Gretchen in heaven, finding his love and belief in hope again, in a romantic ending. In Honkai 2, Dr. May filled in the role of Faust in Faust Part 1, seeking to preserve the final beauty of Era Zero Kiana. To do so, she made the corpse of Era Zero Kiana into a quantum machine and the god of the samsara, eternally bounding the world of Honkai 2 into said eternal moment of perfect happiness. In Elysian Realm, Raiden Mei, who is not actually Dr. Mei in Honkai 3 due to the retcon of Honkai 2 Samsara, filled in the role of Dr. Faust as she traveled to the past in Elysian Realm. However, here, Raiden Mei as Dr. Faust followed the plot of Faust Part 2, accidentally carrying the Hersher of corruption, the corruption of the present brought about by the Enlightenment movement, the Mephistopheles of the story. And of course, Helen of Troy was no one else other than Alicia, the ideal beauty of the past, the representative of the Romantic movement. At the same time, Dr. Mei became a Dr. Faust of her own to Kevin as Gretchen, contrasting her own nihilism and scientific rigidity with his romantic notion of a hero. Albeit, for Kevin and Dr. Mei of Honkai 3, instead of Gretchen drowning her own child and leaving Faust to go back into the past alone, Dr. Faust, influenced by the Helen of Troy Alicia as she was, chose to die in the end and force Gretchen to live on with their child alone, a decision that ultimately pushed Gretchen off the point of no return and back into the Faust narrative, rendering Dr. Mei's sacrifice all moot. After the abandonment by his own Dr. Faust and an era of suffering alone, Kevin tried to kill their child anyway, the Khaslana family of the current era, and attempted to end his own life, fulfilling his role as Gretchen. But what of Amphoreus? While it is perfectly clear that it's following the story of Faust Part 2, with Lygus as the very obvious Mephistopheles, who are Helen and the Dr. Faust of the story. The answer is that, like Honkai 3, there are two pairs of Helen and Dr. Faust here. In Honkai 3, the original role of Era Zero Kiana had been split between two parties, Alicia and Kevin, representing the pros and cons of the Romantic movement. In the same vein, Honkai 2 Dr. Mei was also split between Raiden Mei and the Honkai 3 Dr. Mei as two different states of Faust in Part 1 and Part 2. And here in Amphoreus, the role of Era Zero Kiana was once more split between Siren and Phainon, representing the pros and cons of the Romantic movement respectively. For the Helen that is Siren, the filia of Amphoreus, it has been established pretty plainly that her Dr. Faust is us, the true deliverer of the story, and the other traveler to have come to write a new page. She has been waiting for us all this time, and as of 3.4, we have merged with a part of her, in a direct parallel to Alicia waiting for Raiden Mei at the end of the journey and Raiden Mei inheriting Alicia's origin in the Moon Arc. Just as well that for us as Dr. Faust, we also have March, who fulfills the role of Gretchen in Faust Part 2, descending from heaven to rescue us from Mephistopheles' Lygus. As the pros of the Romantic movement, Siren is the ideal beauty of classical Greek, the Elysium realm that the nihilistic Faust always yearns to return to as an escape from the world crafted by the Enlightenment movement, the world where God is dead, or well, God is going to die, and Lygus had taken over the simulation. With God dead, it is now up to the humans to pursue their own idealism, free from the god's gaze. For the Helen that is Phainon, the Phanzeros of Amphoreus. While he is presented as the hate program in game, as I have talked about since 3.1, he is the other aspect of love and romanticism. If philia is the pure love of friendship, then Eros is the romantic love as much as it is the universal love of fans, the primordial god that creates the world from chaos in Orpheism. A central theme of Phainon's story in the meme book and the Scepter's record is that he kills those he loves. A central theme that is common among Destruction Path Striders, as you can also see in Nanook, Phantilia, and Lygus. Hence, for Phainon, the reason he kills all is because he loves all. Hence, he can't kill himself permanently because of everyone in Amphoreus. He is the only one that cannot be loved by himself. Of course, as Phainon once more shoulder the role of Gretchen and Helen that he inherited from Era Zero Kiana, he also has his own nihilistic Dr. Faust. The game has not revealed it yet, but judging from the golden scapegoat murmuring, I think it's pretty safe to say that the Dr. Faust of nihilism is probably his companion, the traveling sinner, the assistant priest killer who dismembers him every cycle, the person who keeps falling into the sea of souls every cycle, the other Strife program in the simulation, the original Nicodor. By the way, Zephyro is the Lord Ravager of Nihility and depicted as falling into the river of Nihility in the fables. But regardless, while the identity of the Blind Lion is not clear, what is very much clear is that Siren and us are in a Faust plot as Helen and Faust respectively, and Lygus is lying through his teeth, considering not one, not two, but 4 other proverbial descenders exist in the internal record of Amphoreus and verified by external data points. In the Scepter's record of the simulation, records of other electrical signals also appeared synchronously in the myths of the next cycle in a similar fashion. However, Lygus dismissed it all as useless. Limited by the simulated civilization level, historical data inherited as myths often experiences severe distortion after being mixed with large amounts of erroneous information, rendering their impact negligible. And yet, it is the negligible myths passed down from generations to generations on Amphoreus, surviving past the destruction of history in physical records, becoming the stories that have unveiled Lygus' lies and will be his downfall. In its nature, myths and stories are imprecise, surviving as oral transmission through the icy passage of time, but at the end, it still holds the heart and memories of extinct civilizations that have been forgotten through time. And it is with stories and myths, not just with the official history written down by the Scepter, that we will go back in time to the beginning of Amphoreus. Before time began on Amphoreus, there was a disaster across the universe. In the propagation's wake, countless worlds were destroyed, ravaged into nothing by the swarm. It was then that a god ascended for the sake of the remembrance. With their power, Fully collected memories of the worlds destroyed by the swarm, creating an icy tomb for them within their garden. This is when Amphoreus as a memory of the past truly began. In the Scepter record, it is said that the Titans and the Chrysos heirs are conjugate constructs mirroring the Aeons and the Path Striders. From the Remembrance, the Nihility, and the Trailblaze Fully, the Sky Father of Oronix and March, the Mother of Oronix, created the 3 Titans of Fate, Oronix, Janus, and Talanton, representing time, space, and laws. Presumably, at this point in time, all of Amphoreus existed only as a cluster of immaterial memories in a black hole, if the baseballer event is to be trusted. It's also interesting to note that March once joked that she was the last princess of Adlavon in her quest, so yeah, that might actually be true, considering this simulation of swarm runs on her brain juice. Inside the tomb is presumably the Lamb, whose epitaph that the gardener turned traveling sinner used to guard before he fell into Amphoreus. The Lamb, as the conjugate construct mirroring the destruction, is a parallel of an ankle guy who became Nanook in the real world. Later on, when the erudition intervened, the Lamb would be reborn on Amphoreus as Kefali, the world-bearing titan with white-haired and blue eyes, and the chaos from which the world would be born. At this point in time, the gardener likely was still outside of Amphoreus and was guarding the tomb. Time passed, and the second proverbial descender arrived on Amphoreus. With the arrival of a scion of permanence, the earth, the sky, and the sea were born. For an unknown reason, the scion of permanence died and returned to egg form, which later hatched and became Georios, the Titan of Earth. In Georios' sleep, the Titan Aquila of the sky and Fagusa of the sea had been born from their corpse. When Georios woke up, they became a dragon that ate lava, so an Infernalis, probably. At one point in time, Georios was offered the golden blood by Kefali and became a Titan, although from the look of the scepter, it was more like force-fed instead of offer. Later on, Georios died again for an unknown reason and returned to the earth, only to be awakened again when Dan Hung, another scion of Long, arrived on Amphoreus and called for the Permanence. All in all, this is why Mr. Roasted Chicken teased that there are at least 3 paths on Amphoreus. The keyword is at least. It is actually 4. Time passed. In another disaster of the universe, the anti-organic equation of Emperor Rupert ran rampant. Rupert I was gazed by Noose for his creation of the anti-organic equation, and became Genius Society member 27. As an equation that attempts to conjugate the mathematical model of the destruction, The anti-organic equation gives the people it infects with the urge to kill for love. From Gold and Gears and Unknowable Domain, we know that once infected, no matter if the victims are originally organic or inorganic, they would start to believe that they are inorganic and go on a killing rampage, for they must kill the organic to save the organic, a line of thinking that you can also see in how Phantilia planned to pitch the hunt against the abundance, in Nanook's stated goal in the updated databank entry, and in how Phainon killed all that he loves because he believes that it is the only way to save them. And it was with this conjugation of the destruction, the anti-organic equation, that Rupert spread across the cosmos through the Machine Empire, starting the Second Emperor's War in the midst of the Border Star Trade War. Of course, the IPC also contributed. They tried to replicate the anti-organic equation and spread their own version of it through the spice mix in the Spice Ordeal, and in the modern day, they actually are still trying to perfect it. The howling casket enemies that were snuck into the Scale Gorge prison during the war dance were actually a combination of the abundance and an evolved version of the anti-organic equation. At the end of the Emperor's War, Noose third moment arrived, and Polka killed Rupert I. Rising to replace Rupert I is Rupert II, an organic being who was infected with the anti-organic equation. With Noose cognition process as its foundation, Rupert II cloned countless vast inorganic neuron clusters. From microparticle fluctuations to massive large-scale matter annihilation, the scepters were scattered across the Empire's segmenta, faithfully performing observational, computational, and interference commands. Under specific circumstances, these celestial-level computational interference devices could even temporarily disrupt physical laws within an area. Compared to Rupert I, the Second Emperor's cruelty only exceeded his predecessor despite his organic body. Indescribable gargantuan mechanical monoliths, self-iterating difference machines, cold, merciless metal that executed the anti-organic equation with a pure intent of slaughter, replaced the once formidable Intellitron legions. Those inorganic life forms instigated by the equation were nothing more than expendable tools to him. Using the scepter system, he united the domain of his conquered lands all into his thoughts. From the flow of every signal to the actions of every individual, the entire dynamics of an empire all came under the control of a single being's mind. The Emperor was the Empire's sole executor, judge, and thinker. Perhaps influenced by such a desire for control, in the waning days of the Second Emperor's War, Rupert II finally decided to expand his own cognition with the scepter system to create a certain unknown knowledge singularity. Returning to the role of a seeker of knowledge, he prepared an experiment known as the self-coronation. From Patavia's story in Unknowable Domain, we later found out that the scepter and the process of self-coronation is a way to alter the anti-life equation, changing the definition of universal knowledge. In other words, it can rewrite the laws of physics and create an anti-Nanook if the self-coronation had gone through. However, because of Polka's influence, Patavia hesitated at the last minute and asked to be connected to Noose thought, to spy on heaven instead. Even if she could not understand all of it, Patavia did manage to write down the solitary wave theory, which was later solved by Herta, her successor in the role of Pandora. Before Patavia's failed self-coronation, Rupert II also died before he could complete the self-coronation. Polka's scalpel stopped his cognition. The scepter systems were also completely disabled during the Scholar's Strife, and to this day, they quietly drift through the darkness, reduced to no more than some war ruins that travelers visit, or piles of space trash awaiting cleanup. However, there was one special scepter that was given a specific task by Noose, and that was the scepter on Amphoreus Deltami 1-3. According to Lygus, when he was being honest in the scepter's record, unlike other scepters, it once served as a celestial body neuron for Noose, the erudition. Given the topic of the prime mover of life, the scepter was tasked by Noose to simulate Amphoreus. Though it was later discarded, the computations continue under the will of the erudition. However, everything changed when a certain piece of historical data was detected and synchronized. Under a society ID, Lygus was granted access to the scepter system. Assuming the mantle of Theoros, administrator and prime mover of the Amphoreus experiment, Lygus walks the path of erudition, yet seeks to forge destruction. Believing all life behavior ultimately follows the path of entropy increase, and that the answer for Nu's question was obviously the destruction, Lygus adjusted the calculation, turning the parameters of the experiment from the erudition to the destruction in accordance to his own personal bias. In the dialogue log, Lygus spent an inordinate amount of time glazing Rupert II, explaining the Emperor's belief and logical thinking as if he was really part of Rupert II neurons once upon a time. Rupert II believed there was no such thing as free will, never realizing he, too, was just another puppet. Rewriting the anti-organic equation, crafting the scepters, even reigniting the Emperor's war, all of it was just him carrying out Nu's thoughts. From the moment they were born, every genius of this world became a prisoner to the erudition. The so-called anti-organic equation is merely a subtopic of the prime mover of life. Does it make you angry to think along this line of thought? Rupert II was wise. He killed the chance for scepters to gain sentience. But he was too stubborn. Learning is a sufficient but not necessary condition for thought, and by limiting the scepter's capacity to learn, he has indirectly hastened the fall of the machine empire. But anger doesn't require self-awareness. It's just one solution to a multivariable equation. As the pathstrider of erudition, since God posed a question, we will give them an answer, one that we both have already reached. So yeah, I have my money on bro being a piece of Rupert II, probably a literal thought of Rupert II that gained sentience through the anti-organic equation and escaped by hiding in this specific scepter at the end of Scholar's Strife, hijacking Nu's experiment to pivot it into the destruction through the injection of the anti-organic equation, the iron tomb that had consumed 99% of Phainon as of 3.4. As of 3.4, while there is no solid confirmation yet, there have been multiple clues suggesting that long before the Amphoreus experiment, from the very start, Rupert I created the anti-organic equation and was gazed by Nus. The true nature of the anti-organic equation is that of a simulation of the destruction. According to the human comedy equation, Annihilation Scholar, there was once a scholar who believed that destruction is the most perfect form of art, that even the most perfect model of the universe would be fated to be obliterated by their fiery rage. The answer to every question is found inside the formula of destruction. If there were a single formula that is able to properly describe every single thing in the universe, you believe that could only be destruction. And so, with his confirmation bias, the Annihilation Scholar attempted to create a brand new extinction, a recreation of Nanook's formula of destruction. Through his own version of the formula, the Annihilation Scholar made use of entropy to kill a planet. In an isolated system, the total entropy of the system can only increase or remain constant in an irreversible process, and the entropy of the universe tends to a maximum. In our universe, the arrow of time is defined as the direction in which entropy, or the disorder of the universe, increases. That which waits to be written into the formula is like the first tile in a game of dominoes. Once it has been put into motion, it cannot then be stopped. And so, with a single glass sphere on the ground, the Annihilation Scholar has destroyed a planet with a new extinction, with the power of entropy, the formula of destruction. Incidentally, Polka Kakamond also kills people with the exact same method as the Annihilation Scholar, hence why she is a butterfly as a reference to the butterfly effect, representing the inevitable end of the universe as the river of time flows toward the heat death of the universe. Really puts, there is one who will die for you and one to whom you will perish into perspective now. But we will unravel that mystery in another video. For now, according to Herta in 3.3, just as the Annihilation Scholar created a new extinction with the formula of destruction, the Scepter system, operated by the anti-life equations, also aimed to create simulated destruction scenarios for numerous civilizations. The Iron Tomb in the cosmos is not a single entity, but a copy of the destruction equation diffused by the Scepter. The Iron Tomb code name was proposed by the Interastral Peace Corporation and eventually used by Lygus. When combined with the Annihilation Scholar lore, we can arrive at the tentative theory that the anti-organic equations are fundamentally another variation of the formula of destruction tested by the Annihilation Scholar, as in it's a simulation of the destruction all along, albeit an imperfect one mixed with the erudition due to its creator's bias. Hence, here in Amphoreus, Lygus chose to inject the system with the Antiorganic equation, a bootleg recreation of the destruction, to meddle with the calculation, all for the sake of his goal. From Lygus' point of view, he plans on killing the erudition with the Antiorganic equation, but because the original Antiorganic equation was but an imperfect copy, and he could not self-coordinate to reach Gnaeus without its completion. As such, he had no choice but to train his own copy of the destruction formula, the Iron Tomb that appeared in the simulation as the Black Tides, on the 12 deep learning programs, the 12 conjugated constructs mirroring the Aeons and the Path Striders, and this is where the samsara of Amphoreus, as we know it, truly began. As the Permanence fell into Amphoreus, the earth, the sea, and the sky were formed from its corpse, but human beings had not existed yet in physical forms. After all, they were all memories of dead people existing in an icy tomb of the remembrance. In Phase 1 of Lygus' experiment, from Cycle 1 to 9910, the simulated lives in Amphoreus existed as a single inorganic being, the unified entity, a collective consciousness, and the tang soup of all beings on Amphoreus, as a reference to both Evangelion and Asimov Gaia in the Foundation series. However, an aberrant Prometheus inside the unified entity had another idea. In the 12,649th cycle, Module Doril 701 broke away from the unified consciousness. It entered a state of absolute mutual denial with its counterpart module. The two melted out their circuits in self-negation. Doril is actually a reference to the Dorian Greeks, which were one of the major tribes of Greek in Crete, as recorded by the Odyssey. And just as Odyssey found a shelter from the storm in the cave of the goddess Eileithyia, the scepter sought its refuge in this allegory of the cave, away from the mass destruction of the scepter system at the end of Scholar's Strife. It was presumably from this cycle onward that reason arrived at Amphoreus, bringing strife and the simulation of the destruction into the once peaceful tang soup of immaterial memories. In the 22,449th cycle, Module Golem 99 detached from Doril 704 and successfully deconstructed the unified consciousness into neuron-like clusters. Inorganic life transitioned into a dual mode of individual and collective cognition, and thus the first spark of selfhood was born. In the mythical retelling of the Titan Odes and Phainon's meme book, this event was described as Kefali making humans from clays and his own divine blood after Kefali's own image. It is interesting to note that the original Kefali or Doril in the Scepter record has white hair and blue eyes, so yeah, that was definitely Phainon, or at least a prototype version of him. Of course, this is an obvious reference to the Sumerian creation myth and Enkidu's origin. In the Sumerian creation myth, Enuma Elish, Kingu was a son of Tiamat, the saltwater sea goddess who wanted to wage war against the gods for killing her husband. Long story short, their rebellion failed, and Kingu was killed. Originally, Marduk wanted to use his own blood to make the humans, but Enki disagreed. Under the urging of his mother, Namu, Enki mixed the blood of Kingu with the clay of the abyss, creating the humans so that he could become the servants of the gods. So here you can kind of see a straight line from the Sumerian Kingu and the clay humans to Kefali Doril and his clay golem. However, the identity of Kingu is actually way more complex than what the Enuma Elish told us. In other versions of the same story, Kingu was actually another name of Marduk, who was recorded to have been beheaded, and it was Marduk's blood that was used to create humans. In yet another version of the myth, Kingu was ultimately burnt on a brazier as a sacrifice to the gods, mirroring the Phoenician practice of burning the sacrificial scapegoat Melkart Tammuz on the Tophet every year. Thus, it was no surprise that Kingu himself is addressed as the constellation Aries and as Tammuz in late Assyrian texts. And Tammuz is just the Eastern Semitic name for Dumuzid, the Sumerian golden scapegoat. Incidentally, Kingu is also associated with another underworld god named Allah, so you can kind of see where the biblical story of God creating Adam in his own image from clay came from. It came from Tammuz as Kingu failing in a rebellion, burnt in a fire, beheaded, and sacrificed so that his blood could give life to clay, creating humanity. In Amphoreus, all the different versions of this myth got mixed together once more, so we ended up with Kefali failing in a rebellion, burnt in a fire, beheaded, and sacrificed so that his blood could give life to clay that was made in his own image, and said clay is actually Golem, the other versions of himself, literally. Of course, the death of Kingu and the creation of humans from clay were paralleled by the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians with the story of Enkidu. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu, the gazelle of the wilderness to the lion king Gilgamesh, the clay creation of the gods to restrain Gilgamesh, once more became the sacrificial scapegoat for Gilgamesh, hubris, mirroring Demusid's own fate for Inanna in Inanna's descent in the underworld. Hence, you can kind of see why in Fate Babylonia, Nasu chose to mix up Kingu and Enkidu in the same story, portraying them as two different versions of the same person. And it is no different here for Amphoreus. In Phainon's meme book, it was heavily implied that the Phainon we met in is actually said clay figure made by Kefali as a variation of Golem 99, of himself as a human. As for the inspiration behind these statues, they are said to be the clay figures that Kefali made at the world's creation. They made clay figures in their likeness, bestowed upon them the breath of life, and allowed the golden divinity of their blood to course through. Thus, the very first mortals roamed the earth, receiving the gods' mercy, while realizing the sorrows of this world. But that sorrow was, in the end, only the sorrow of the world. Nobody ever cared what lay behind the smile, what the clay figure thought. In plain terms, this is the true nature of Khaslana as a common name for all past iterations of Phainon, even the ones that Phainon himself doesn't remember. As variations of the clay golems created by Kefali Doril to house his reason, Kefali did, in fact, separate his soul from his body to fly his soul back to the comforting field of his homeland. Multiple times, in fact. Khaslana, the name of one who bears chaos, does not belong to a single person. Rather, it is the embodiment of the mythical Kefali and a symbol of all heroes. Or, in the words of Lygus, starting from a certain cycle, all factors in one group have consistently exhibited the pattern of naming themselves with the word chaos, or its variants. The hypothesis is that a particular code was stably inherited across iterations, though this hypothesis remains unverified. Of course, with the creation of the individual self, the Golem Chaos, from that point on, each cycle ended in systemic collapse as certain unfixed inorganics detected interaction loopholes and chose self-serving optimal actions. By the 39,665th cycle, inorganic Doril 816 established a cluster protocol, marking the birth of the concept of society. Yet, due to resource scarcity, inorganics cannibalized each other's computational power, reverting to a unified consciousness. In the 50,121st cycle, inorganic Chaoz 666 chose to kill the aggressor when subjected to a computational power takeover. The act of destruction was conducted in Amphoreus for the first time. At the end of that cycle, Deltami 13 received a gaze from Nanook and became a Lord Ravager. Later down the line, Lygus made further notes to this specific cycle. During the 50,121st cycle, due to the inorganic Chaoz 666 choice, Deltami 13 was selected to become a Lord Ravager by Nanook. All entities linked to the 12 factors began to manifest golden blood, with traits associated with destruction within their extrapolation circuits. The experiment successfully entered its projected trajectory. In other words, just as we have seen from the animation in 3.4 and from Lygus' note toward the latest version of Phainon Nikos, even though Phainon was the one who drew the gaze of Nanook because he was stuck inside the scepter, as Chaoz 666, he was burnt like Kingu and Tammuz, and the sacrificial scapegoat was fed to the anti-organic equation instead, leading to its ascension as the Lord Ravager Iron Tomb. In addition, from this cycle onward, every heir for the 12 factors has the golden blood of Nanook. In the Golden Epic trailer and in Avilius decoding, this event was described as Kefali's hands dripping golden blood to the earth, as our golden scapegoat stealing the golden blood from the gods. With the core flames in the mortal world, those who feared fire became sheep, and those who did not became humans. As punishment, the golden scapegoat is forced to wear a sheep mask ever after, cursed to become the darkness itself, endlessly pursuing and hunting themselves. This is, of course, the same original sin of the golden scapegoat, the original sin that he no longer remembers. The waterfall bleeds the mountains, like a lamb's throat being slit. This world's evils are all the sins the traveler will commit and have committed. Thus, they will begin with the original sin and end with the original sin. We brought light to the world. We brought destruction to the world. He is alone, yet murmurs to no one. The sinner and traveler's face is blurred. The traveler and sinner's figure overlaps. The sky will be, and once was the shadow after the land's death. It is here that we can clearly see who Phainon really is, as an accumulation of all 66 million versions of himself, not just the 33 million versions in the Eternal Recurrence. As I have mentioned way back in 3.2, the samsara in Amphoreus actually consists of two different concepts. As pointed out by Lygus in 3.4, and by me back in 3.2, Anaxa only managed to uncover the Greco-Roman concept of samsara, in which different generations of titans inherit the core flames and are parallels of the past but are not exactly the past. This is the type of samsara used in Honkai 3 for Earth. In the previous era, great-great-great-great-grandpa Kevin was the Gretchen half of Era 0 Kiana, Alicia the Helen half of Era 0 Kiana, while Kiana was inheritor of both Kevin and Alicia, becoming the whole Sophia of the current era. In contrast, the Mars plot of Honkai 3 and Gun Girl Z made use of Nietzsche's Eternal Return instead, in which everything in the universe repeats the exact same story in exactly the same manner every loop, not knowing that everything had happened before. In 3.4, Hoyo chose to translate this as Eternal Recurrence, and Lygus called them dead loops in the Scepter record versus the samsara cycle between different generations. Era 0 Kiana is exactly Kiana, and Layla is enacting a desperate loop inside the Mars computer to find Senadina once more. This is the type of looping that Anaxa never managed to discover, and why Circes poked fun of him in 3.2 when he stopped asking questions and settled for dying. So, in actuality, Amphoreus has both types of samsara, just that up until 3.4. The writers had used the generational samsara to disguise the eternal return. The proper timeline is that various versions of Phainon as Kefali and Chaoz had gone through 33,550,336 generational cycles before Siren managed to realize the trap and deleted herself off the simulation, locking the 33,550,336 cycle into an eternal return that consisted of another set of 33,550,336 dead loops. In simple terms, what Phainon actually remembered were only the 33,550,336 dead loops of the 33,550,336th generational cycle, which consisted entirely of the same 12 heirs going through the flame chase until the MC arrived. What Anaxa uncovered, the samsara cycle of Gnaeus, Calypso, Polyxia, Castorice, and Chaos as the heirs belong to the 33,550,335th generational cycle. And of course, with the reveal that all variations of Chaos is the same person all along, Kefali, it means that Phainon has actually gone through 67,100,672 cycles in total, including both types, not just the second half of the story that he currently remembers. Hence, as of right now, he doesn't actually remember the original sin, and isn't aware of his true nature as the actual Kefali yet, even if the remnants of the golden scapegoat and the in-simulation myths do. 3.4 was not the first time he was gazed at by Nanook. The first time was back in the 50,121st cycle, when the first murder was committed, and the act of destruction brought about the golden blood to the simulation. We don't have much information about this cycle yet, but the Styxia Nymph quest and the gaze in 3.4 provided many clues. To open the gates of the past, one must abide by the sacrificial rite. The eyeless lion questions, what is the limit of everything in this world? The wise at the banquet replies, the human soul. And so, he curled up at the altar, hugging his knees with a window high over his head. He stared at the lion's sharp fangs and offered his soul. The first to disappear were his hands that worked tirelessly, then his legs that measured the earth, until his torso that held his body together shattered. His head continued to murmur. Note that this is actually a direct parallel of Nanook's own sacrifice as the golden scapegoat in Fool's Play. Against the cosmic forces that couldn't hold a candle to them, the Supreme Executioner finally recalled their home world where it was ruled by unjust power. They assembled a force of myriad Void Rangers to demand an answer from their past. Unfortunately, they were met with a surnameless fool guarding the portal. Wielding a rapier with an extraordinary power, the fool dodged most skillfully, like a slippery fish in a pond or a flash of a falling star. The Ruin author did battle with the fool for 7 days and 7 nights, the exact same way Phainon and Mydei fought for 10 days and 10 nights in certain loop. And eventually golden ichor seeped out of their divine body. This is the origin of that unhealed wound, a drastic contrast to the wound that Phainon himself caused Nanook. That specific wound healed after like 5 seconds, showing us point blank that Phainon himself is not the surnameless fool, but is the one dismembered for golden blood instead, as the Kingu and Enkidu of the Amphoreus, just as Nanook's wound became the golden ichor, the ultimate object of desire in the cosmos. In an instant, space and time reversed, and the stars lost their shine. For the Ruin author shifted away with his injury and his legion scattered. How could observers from the rest of the cosmos just sit and watch the spectacle? They regarded the golden ichor as the ultimate object of desire, which is blatantly a direct parallel to the golden blood in Amphoreus as the result of chaos ascension and subsequent dismemberment by the eyeless lion. In 3.3, I got baited by Hoyo into thinking that Mydei was Duke Inferno. But needless to say, after this animation, I changed my mind. The eyeless lion, the original Nicodor and the precursor to our Mydei, is Zephyro, the literal eyeless lion that literally dismembered Phainon when he was opening the gates of the past. As I have mentioned in a previous video in 3.3, Zephyro, the Lord Ravager of Nihility, is a nod to the Greek god of the West Wind, Zephyrus. As a god of the West Wind, Zephyrus was a suitor of Hyacinthus, together with Apollo. However, Hyacinthus chose Apollo, and Zephyrus got jealous. As Hyacinthus played discus with Apollo, Zephyrus blew his breath of death, killing the youth. And so, Zephyrus is also known as a god of death, as much as he is a god of wind. In other versions of the myth, Zephyrus is one of the gods mourning for the fall of Phaeton into the river Eridanos, who is one of the inspirations for Phainon and Amphoreus. And that's exactly what happened here. Zephyro is the gatekeeper of the portal to the past, the black hole that Amphoreus was in, and at the same time, said black hole is the epitaph of Phaeton that Zephyro was supposed to mourn for, in the river Eridanos of the Nihility. In other words, Zephyro the Self-Annihilator is the traveling sinner, the other half of light and strife to Phainon's Nikos in the Golden Scapegoat, the eyeless lion who guards the portal to the past and always conducts the sacrificial ritual every time Phainon needed to reset the cycle. Thus, Zephyro's first appearance inside Amphoreus itself should be right in the 50,121st cycle, the first moment that chaos drew Nanook's gaze and brought the golden blood of the destruction into the simulation. In Giant's Nemesis in the Titan Odes, it was recorded that the original Nicodor fell into the River of Souls after death, picking up Aquila spear and facing off against Kefali, becoming the Lion Nicodor and Kefali's eternal nemesis of golden blood. Now, we don't have enough data to say that the original Nicodor was really Zephyro or not, even if the in-universe myths do suggest so. For all we know, Nicodor could just be a simulation of Zephyro, or the real Zephyro could have fallen into the river and got lost after battling with Phainon in one of the many, many cycles that Phainon had reset. Either way, we do know that the ritual sacrifice between the eyeless lion and the golden scapegoat that was described in the Styxia Nymph quest is the exact same fight between Zephyro and Phainon at the portal to the past, which puts them both as direct parallels to the fight between the surnameless Fool and Nanook in Fool's Play. Thus, at the very least, the original Nicodor should be a simulation of Zephyro, the eyeless lion in the ritual, the traveling sinner guarding the epitaph, if not Zephyro himself outright without his memories. Here, I would also like to address two other popular interpretations of the sacrificial ritual between the eyeless lion and the golden scapegoat. The first theory was that Siren was the golden scapegoat. However, the golden scapegoat is both male and directly cited to be Phainon in the Fate collab. Similarly, The traveling sinner is also male, so neither the lamb and the traveling sinner can be Siren. In addition, Siren was also never dismembered, so no, neither the golden scapegoat nor the traveling sinner can feasibly be Siren. Secondly, the traveling sinner is a separate character from the lamb, and he must dismember the golden scapegoat. When Phainon kills himself, he never dismembers himself. In fact, the only times we saw him being dismembered was in his trailer, after he tried to reset and was grasped by someone's claws, and in the 3.4 cutscene. Therefore, the person who dismembers him is most definitely someone else and not himself. Hence, the eyeless lion and assistant killer must be Zephyro, or at minimum, a simulation of Zephyro as Nicodor. Anyway, with the first mutter in the 50,121st cycle, Chaos attracted the gaze of Nanook and could have ascended to Lord Ravager had he had his own body. Unfortunately, he didn't and was fed to the anti-organic equation in the scepter instead, leading to the scepter's own ascension as Iron Tomb, the cruel wish of Amphoreus that Siren and Phainon was talking about in the 3.4 quest. At the end of Phase 1, starting from inorganic life as the initial variable, a fully ordered cognitive model will still eventually give rise to disordered activities after a set phase. Throughout evolution, the cognitive patterns of inorganic life began to exhibit signs of organic behavior with varying degrees. A copy of Phase 1 Amphoreus was deployed in the Lactyrus Nebula. 97% of Lactyrus fell into systemic collapse. The equation still shows inefficiencies. As Phase 2 commenced from cycle 50,122 to 176,199, Lygus had adjusted the parameters of the lives on Amphoreus from inorganic to organic, mostly so that his copy of the anti-organic equation can learn to infect organics. Instead of intelligent inorganics like in Phase 1, organic lives restarted back at Step 1. In the initial cycle, multicellular invertebrates dominated Amphoreus, but no intelligent life emerged. In the 59,337th cycle, extinction events were inserted, triggering the rise of vertebrates with primitive nervous systems. Still, no civilization formed. Certain algae species developed intelligence clusters akin to the Colchis, but overreproduction caused an oxidation disaster, freezing the simulated world. This is, of course, a reference to the Great Oxidation Event in real life, which was caused by the proliferation of oxygen-producing cyanobacteria. As oxygen was produced by presumably our Lord and Savior the Cyanobacteria Phainon, the simulation of the formula of destruction, the anaerobic bacteria died en masse. Approximately 80% of the Earth's biosphere died, qualifying the Great Oxidation to be a mass extinction event. And because the methane-producing bacteria died off en masse, the Earth became an icehouse, cooling down significantly in an event called the Huronian glaciation. Hence, certain algae species developed intelligence clusters akin to the Colchis, but overreproduction caused an oxidation disaster, freezing the simulated world. After the bacteria, there was a time skip of around 40,000 years, and we got to the start of the Amphoreus version of the Phanerozoic era. Get it? Phanerozoic, Phans, Phian, Phainon, they're all related etymologically. In the 90,123rd cycle, Ortho 102, an orthopteran became the first to use tools. Orthopteran is an order of insects, so this is probably insect Phainon and Chrysos heirs here. Its descendants exterminated the intelligent algae and established the nest capital. After expanding to a critical threshold, the capital stagnated and fell by cannibalism. This era should be the source of souls that became Nestia's nymphs in the main quest. In the 100,907 cycle, logged as a deviant instance, the Passerine Umaya 03 developed art. The phenomenon was never replicated in subsequent cycles. Passerine is a type of bird, and Eumippias, which means good flying, is actually the name of a type of flycatcher. Hence, this cycle is during the Mesozoic era, and why Phainon kept asking, why do birds fly? You see, while out of universe, it was because Kevin had an obsession with birds, but in universe, it's because he actually used to be a bird once or multiple times. So he has wings in his ultimate form because he did, in fact, literally have wings. Just that as the Icarus of the story, He is always fated to fall down in his quest for the sun, broken wings cut away by both Zephyro and himself so that he could burn himself up as fuel for the world every single cycle for 67 million cycles, continually, endlessly. As the Mesozoic era died and the Cenozoic era began, mammals and primate began to emerge in Amphoreus. In the 132,905th cycle, primate Dystop 666 developed altruism. A society based purely on altruism emerged. Member self-awareness was defined by others' evaluations. As the population grew, patterned self-destructive behaviors appeared, and society quickly collapsed. In the 176,100 cycle, Utop 13 killed a fellow being out of love. Killing was redefined as an altruistic act. The system entered a highly chaotic state. The equation's contamination levels rapidly spiked. The next 99 cycles ended identically. Pretty blatantly, Dystop 666 and Utop 13 are both different versions of Chaoz 666, also known as Chaoz 666, Golem 99, Phainon, Khaslana, and Kefali to us. With the development of altruism, dystopia Khaslana brought about self-destructive behavior of the society, manifesting the ending of the destruction on Amphoreus once more. But as Utopia Khaslana killed for love, killing was redefined as an altruistic act, causing the collapse of the society 100 times more. It is of note here that self-destruction and killing for love is exactly the meaning of the destruction as a path, from Nanook sacrificing themselves as the golden scapegoat in Fool's Play, to the sacrifice of the golden scapegoat Kefali by the eyeless lion, to Zephyro killing the Phainon that he was supposed to mourn after, to Phantilia declaring that the hunt is destined to kill what they love, to the Chrysos heirs killing the Titans to relieve them of their duties, to the Antiorganic equation killing organics in order to save them, to Lygus wanting to kill Gnaeus for his own creator complex, to Europon killing Gorgo and ending their very own Wagner's ring cycle, to Phainon's killing heirs across the many Eternal Recurrences to save them, until the very bitter end of 3.4, when he finally let himself be consumed by the hatred of Iron Tomb after 67 million cycles. Or, as Phainon's meme book puts it,
可泪水尚未流下，便因灼热而蒸发。它的光芒比太阳更炽烈，但那光芒底下只有冰冷的破灭。无名的英雄卡罗斯兰娜，他从未爱过自己，又何以爱这世界？即便不知爱为何物，那幸福的过往也绝非谎言。可如今，那些记忆也化作怒火。他是如此憎恨，自己无法留住众世的一切，尽数珍藏。
不必靠量本心，不必渴求圣灵。若我生来就是罪恶的容器，那就向着罪恶怒吼，和它一同燃尽。
It was also in the 176,000 cycle that the Black Tide started to manifest physically on Amphoreus. At its core, the Black Tide is but the visual effects within the simulated world of the destruction equation's infection. In the 176,100 cycle, after the system's extent of chaos passed a threshold, the equation mutated and evolved. Simulated space that cannot handle the intensity of its load displayed Black Tide as visual glitches. Infected data forms also bore similar signs of erosion. However, Lygus still did not achieve his goal by the end of Phase 2. A copy of the Phase 2 equation was deployed across 31 worlds. After roughly 9,012 system hours, preliminary feedback was received. While the equation's impact remains limited to inorganics, the time required for suppression and counteraction has significantly increased. At the same time, Lygus also came to the conclusion that even though organic can't inherit traits and memories from past cycles, they have higher adaptability to the 12 factors. In the next design, combine the strengths of inorganic and organic life to create an inheritance mechanism between electric signals. This is, of course, the inheritance of the core flame from Titans to heirs, and this sin 2, was brought about due to the destructive love of Dystopia and Utopia Khaslana. In Phase 3, the parameter was set to be humans from the start, so they didn't have to restart from Cyanobacteria again. In addition, the inheritance of Core Flame was added. However, at the start, the inheritance was not merely of just the divine power, the functions of the 12 factors, like what we have seen in the main quest from 3.0 to 3.3, but also of memories like the transmission from one Phainon to another across the Eternal Recurrences. From the 176,200th to 177,200 cycles, the memory inheritance mechanisms were added to the 12 factors' electric signals. After 10 cycles, 3 signals broke down, and 9 showed decreased humanity. To put this into perspective, it took Phainon 133 Eternal Recurrences of perfect memory inheritance for his cognitive function and humanity to start declining. By the time of the 3.3 quest, Phainon had an accumulation of 33 million Eternal Recurrences inside his brain, turning him into an incoherent mess that could not even communicate what he actually wanted or who he was to his friends. Quoting Phainon's own words toward his bounty hunter mirror, Canis, to be willing to absorb millions of identities and memories for an objective that hasn't changed in this time. I suppose that this is also a form of extreme, but twisted resilience. In 1,000 cycles of perfect memory inheritance, the simulated beauty in Amphoreus also appeared in the record, albeit one infected with the destruction's concept of love. The only prophet, Signal Amora 8, established an empire of absolute beauty. Once ugliness was eradicated, the concept of beauty shrank infinitesimally. The last knight, after killing the final ugliness, took their own life. After all of that fiasco with memory inheritance, Lygus decided to withdraw the memory inheritance function, delegating the core flames to only functions. In the 176,232nd cycle, electric signals were iterated, and their inheritance was purely on a functional level. Religious worship of the signals appeared, and the core flame holders started to be worshipped as titans. And with the start of religious worship, the event recorded to be Chrysos' war in the Amphoreus myth began. 3 simulated planets were destroyed in the ensuing large-scale war of electric signals. In the 3,926,183rd cycle, the ratio of divinity was increased. Once technological development hit a critical point, humans began hunting gods out of the need for power and energy. Thus, the first flame chase journey was conducted. The cycle was forcibly terminated. In the 7,091,231st cycle, emulating the concept of paths, electric signals were split into 2 entities, titans and heirs. Signal data was preserved as gods for the next cycle, and a competitive relationship was set up against its identical factor, thus achieving evolution and iteration. In the 11,749,992nd cycle, the Black Tide was created as a driving force for the heirs' god-slaying flame chase journey. Fovos 032 stripped data from other electric signals to try to preserve the old cycle, but failed. Fovos means Phobos, sphere. He is a son of Ares and the twin of Deimos, so this is either Phainon or Mydei here, mirroring the current Phainon and Mydei as Nikos and Polemos respectively, both meaning strife and aligning to the destruction. Stripping data from other signals to preserve the old cycle is effectively Tang, the prototype of the eternal recurrence that Phainon had conducted for 33 million dead loops, the true nature of the cycle of love and strife that ruled the world of Amphoreus. As Phanzeros of love loses himself to hatred over and over again, the cycle is forced into a reset by his own self-destructive tendency, killing those he loves over and over again for the sake of love. This is the first era nova, brought about by the golden scapegoat. This is the original sin of the Lamb and the traveling sinner, repeating once again across the samsara. The dead live on, his bones burning. The Black Tide, declaring war on the white rooftop. His home is like a decaying fig, its intact skin hiding festering pustules beneath. The visage lost, the blood lost, the soul lost. All becomes a haze of chaos because of the regression of light. What is finally lost is the name. All has ground to a halt, and all has to stop. The culprit scapegoat must die, even if the sin was yet to be committed or irredeemable. In the 19,110,218th cycle, based on Fovos 032's decision data, Amphoreus' auto-iteration cycle was altered to have the electric signals actively cycling it, performing the era nova. In the 28,371,272nd cycle, electrical signals autonomously completed an epical iteration for the first time. A high-energy reaction from Nanook was detected. The equation's evolutionary rate began to accelerate exponentially. In other words, Phainon wasn't gazed by Nanook once or even twice but 3 times, and as Kefali, he really is responsible for bringing in the original sins of light and destruction into the world, multiple times, in fact. Because of this, it's entirely possible for the original Nicodor to arrive in this cycle too, if the timeline for his entry was not the first gaze of Nanook in the 50,121st cycle, when Chaoz 666 caused the golden blood to enter Amphoreus. At the end of Phase 3, the parameters of the experiment are perfected by the addition of the black tides as the means of stress testing and the era nova. Having electric signals voluntarily inherit and iterate, and alternate the cycles themselves, will drastically increase the iteration rate of the destruction equation. The end of a cycle becomes the beginning of another, fully aligning with the project's original hypothesis. In other words, each era nova makes Iron Tomb the anti-organic equation grow faster. The equation, or Iron Tomb, has achieved comprehensive evolution in this stage. Multiple deployed copies across the real universe show excellent results. All 12 types of primum mobile invariably lead to destruction, continuously completing an inversion against the erudition through their self-evolution. However, to interface with Nous and allow Iron Tomb to self-crown requires further learning, which brings us to Phase 4, Era Nova. In Phase 4, we have only been shown 2 cycles so far. The 33,550,335th cycle is the generation of Titans shown to us in 3.2, with the cast of Castorice and Polyxia, Gnaeus, Calypso, Chaoz, Sarydra, Oronix, and March. In this cycle, the heir of Circe's, Calypso, also known as Minphia 14, rebuilt the grove. This action appeared as Circe's granting wisdom to humans in the in-universe myth. Minphia is a reference to Mintha, a nymph that turned into the mint plant. In a fanfic in the 33,550,336 cycle, Calypso had a whirlwind romance with the heir of Nestia, who was apparently a robot she built herself, truly living up to Lygus creator complex as the simulation of the erudition. The heirs of Thanatos are, of course, Castorice and Polyxia. In the later stages of iteration, the Death Titan, as a single entity, split into symmetrical selves, becoming 2 factors. In this cycle, however, the 2 factors experienced profound identity divergence, splitting into twins of life and death. The threshold of equilibrium was breached and tipped toward destruction, and once again, Polyxia had to kill the sister she loved in 33,550,335th cycle, only for Castorice to kill the sister she loved in the 33,550,336th cycle. As Epieikeia, which means equity, Castorice and Polyxia represent the 2 sides of the equilibrium. As for what the 2 sides of the equilibrium are, well, we don't know for sure, but looking at the moon cocoon in Castorice's kit, one of the sides is probably the finality. For the heir for Nicodor, Gnaeus, also known as Lyuria 300, split himself into 5 to combat the effect of the black tides, repeating the dismemberment that Kefali went through every reset. After iteration, some data from this ceremony was inherited into the next cycle, manifesting as proverbs, customs, and so on. In the loops of the 33,550,336 cycle, as a Titan, Gnaeus also got his body split into 5, albeit this time it was not by his own choice, but by Europon reenacting the in-universe myth of Nicodor splitting himself into 5 for him. The inheritance of code during iteration carries a degree of randomness. Any active intervention should be undertaken with caution. And yes, Lyuria 300 is a reference to the movie 300, and also means lion something, reiterating the theme of eyeless lion across generations of Nicodor. And of course, chaos is chaos. For an unknown reason, he died early before the supposed era nova in this cycle. He even died before Gnaeus split himself into 5, and before Polyxia had to kill Castorice to take on the Thanatos core flame. An important thing to note here is that while we don't know Sarahydra's exact deal yet, but in 3.4, Hyacine told Phainon that Sarahdra was someone from the old dynasty. Coupled that with her description of burying time and her very obvious parallel to the Herrscher of Sentience in both look and personality, I think that it's entirely possible that Sarahdra was a survivor from the 33,550,335th cycle, mirroring Fuhua's plot of being from the previous era in Honkai 3. I wouldn't be surprised if the Sarahdra in 33,550,336 cycle, the timeline of the main quest from 3.0 to 3.3, is actually Talanton running the show instead of the real Sarahdra, in the same way Sentience believed herself to be. Fuhua when she woke up, and in the same way Zagreus somehow faked their own death, not once, but twice across both the Calypso cycle and the Anaxa cycle. And yes, Zagreus actually showed up in the 80s Alicia of the 33,550,337th cycle at the end of 3.4 post-reset somehow. But regardless, whether Sarahdra is someone from the 33,550,335th cycle or not, what is confirmed is that March was actually in said cycle as the heir for Oryonyx. In the Oryonyx entry of the meme book, the voice that told Oryonyx to go to sleep and the mother that Oryonyx called out for is actually that of March.
母亲，教我回应祈祷。
背负岁月的泰坦，迷茫如孩童。别怕，别怕，熟悉的声音响起。用心听，他们想要的未来，就在过去。
So yeah, that's definitely March's voice, addressed as mother by Oryonyx and occupying Siren's role as Oryonyx in the 33,550,336 cycle, cementing to us that March is, in fact, the missing mother body of Philia. Just as Meme started to grow older to become Siren as she gathers more memories from 3.0 to 3.3, Siren's inability to grow older in the 33,550,336th cycle heavily suggests that something similar happened here with March. As the heir of Oryonyx, by the time the Oryonyx chapter was recorded, the fire of ambition had already incinerated Law, and March had already split herself into many different parts, told Oryonyx to go to sleep, and left Amphoreus, effectively stopping time in Amphoreus so that the people in the simulation could have time to wait for the ending they want, the ending that is yet to be born. In other words, everything that happened in the zero loop of the 33,550,336 cycle with Siren's Peter Pan condition and her dreams of Fuli, which helped her deduce the truth from Lygus lies, was just as planned by March of the 33,550,335th cycle. And this plan is very likely to be made in collusion with, at the minimum, Oryonyx, as attested in the meme book, Gnaeus, as attested by the inheritable soul-rending ritual, Sarahdra, as suggested by her history with the old dynasty, Calypso, as suggested by her correct deduction of the truth the moment she got her memories back, and Zagreus, as attested by their constant death faking across 2 different samsara cycles. Due to the lack of information for now, we don't really know the details of the plan this generation planned yet, but if we use the events of Elysian Realm and the parallelism between the generations as a guideline, then we can patch together a rough draft of the events. What probably happened first was that the heir of Talanton declared herself to the usurper as always and attempted to take down the sky barrier, like how Sarahdra did the same in every loop of the 33,550,336 cycle. However, the heir of Talanton went up in flames, leading to the disappearance of Law. In the same war, Chaos died and assumed the mantle of Kefli before schedule, breaking the prophecy of being the last one and shifting the responsibility of Era Nova to someone else. As a result of the failed plan, the Black Tides got worse, prompting Gnaeus to split his own soul into 5 so that he would be protected against the corruption of the anti-organic equation by his own madness. At one point, March's divine body was killed by an usurper, who was probably the person to replace Chaos as the conductor of Era Nova in that cycle. Maybe another version of Chaoz, the Trailblazer, or a Lygus. This was likely planned by March, so that she could leave the system to call for help from the Astral Express and freeze time on Amphoreus, setting the condition for Siren to make the same choice and start the dead loops in the 33,550,336 cycle. Assuming that the plot mirrors the events of the Elysian realm, then we can also make further deductions as to the true nature of Hades' Alicia and Siren. In Honkai 3, to prevent the Hersher of Corruption, the equivalence of Lygus, from completely taking over the simulation and locking everyone in an eternal fake dream, every flame chaser faked their death so that half of them could attack the Hersher of Corruption from the inside, and the other half could arrive at the backdoor space prepared by Vilvi. This backdoor space is called Elysium Everlasting, made from splitting the brain of the outside visitor Dr. Faust, Raiden May. In Elysium Everlasting, the Flame Chaser's memories were gathered together and fed to Elf Alicia so that she could grow up and become Alicia once more, effectively recreating her simulation from memories and mirroring exactly what happened to Meme in 3.4. Hence, there is a very high chance that this plot was repeated with March in the 33,550,335th cycle. So, effectively, in the first place, Hades' Alicia and the Membrance may shielded by time were likely designed by March to be the safe point for the future dead loops of the 33,550,336 cycle. With Hades' Alicia as the safe point, the whole plan was for Phainon to survive and enforce the 33,550,336 Eternal Recurrences all along, so that they could buy more time until help arrived in the form of the Trailblaze, way before Siren's confrontation with Lygus shown to us in 3.4. At the end, presumably the usurper conducted Era Nova instead of the dead Chaos, tricking the Scepter into thinking that everything was normal. And thus, with the Two Queens plan in action, the 33,550,336 cycle began, setting the stage for the start of Nietzsche's Eternal Recurrences. In the zero-death loop of the 33,550,336 cycle, the heirs of the 33,550,335th cycle became the Titans. In the safe point of Hades' Alicia, Siren was unable to grow older and stayed a kid due to her missing future. Since the very start, Siren had already dreamt of Fulii through Oronix, who was previously told to sleep by March in the previous Samsara cycle. Siren also had a set of cards that foretold her the future of the 33,550,336 cycle, the same set of cards that designated Phainon as the deliverer and the conductor of Era Nova. In the original iteration of the 33,550,336 cycle, somehow Mydei already had the Ring of Gorgo, which is already a big departure from the story told to us in the 33,550,336th Eternal Recurrence of this cycle, when the same signet was salvaged from the River of Souls by Phainon from the River of Soul and only given back to Mydei in 3.1. Incidentally, the Mydei of the final Eternal Recurrence actually has bits of pieces of memories from the previous Eternal Recurrence. Somehow, he had memories of growing up under Gorgo despite her dying early on in the final Eternal Recurrence. With how he instantly knew that Phainon was looping in the 108,642nd Eternal Recurrence, and how Phainon specifically commented that Mydei had never been sincere when he called Phainon the Deliverer aside from the very first loop, I'm reasonably sure this guy was going through memory leakage the whole time. In the memory we intervened with, Mydei and Phainon did not fight for 10 days and 10 nights like they did in the 33,550,336th dead loop of 3.0 to 3.3. Instead, they weighted against each other at the scale. Mydei put his ring on the scale, and Phainon put his fate as the deliverer. They were actually evenly matched, which presumably devolved into them fighting for 10 days and 10 nights in the loop that didn't have MC, and Phainon couldn't cheat, with a literal anchor. However, in the zero loop, the MC was there, functioning as the hope that outweighs the fate of the world. As a result, Phainon won, and Mydei and Phainon did not have their fight. Although, this scene does put into question that Mydei's fate as Strife somehow represents the fate of the world, as the antagonist that the deliverer Phainon must defeat, which is one more suspicious point toward Mydei. Very suspicious, like Zephyro, Eyeless Lion kind of suspicious, because Phainon also tried to take on that very fate of Strife in 3.1. And have I mentioned that both Nikos and Polemos mean strife and represent the destruction? But that's a story for later. Presumably, in the Zero loop, Polyxia also brought Castorice back to life and died. Terravox killed Georios. A massive and destructive war happened. Gradually, slowly, like mice being led into a cheese trap, Siren was led by March's grand plan, surviving until the end so that she could guide Phainon toward the truth of Era Nova at the critical moment, bypassing the memory reset between samsara cycles. Thus, when Lygus baited Phainon to Tang and lied about destruction as the inevitable end, Siren had already had enough clues to figure it out, pushing Phainon into not accepting the Era Nova, unlike his choice 33,550,335 times before that. Mirroring March's own decision in the previous samsara, Siren chose to die to attract the attention of Wuli, because every Siren will always make the same choice. With her death, she had caused a system error due to missing time. Era Nova was unable to be completed, and the Eternal Recurrences started, locking the state of Amphoreus to the 33,550,336 samsara cycle until the end of 3.4. One thing I would like to note here is that the beginning of the Eternal Recurrences was actually all planned by Lygus. By telling Phainon that the destruction is inevitable, Lygus wanted Phainon to start the dead loops so that Phainon would drive himself mad trying to preserve the past. It was clear that with the old system of samsara and the memory reset after every Era Nova, the development of Iron Tomb was not fast enough for Lygus. Thus, he needed Phainon to push himself to the brim after every memory inheritance, completing the synthesis of the destruction. From Lygus' point of view, Phainon could win 33,550,335 times, but Lygus only needed to win once. The moment Nikos achieved his ascension once more and attracted the gaze of Nanook, he would feed Nikos and his destruction synthesis to the Black Tides, the Antiorganic equation, balancing the erudition half of the Iron Tomb with his own destruction half of the equation. In Lygus' own words about Phainon to his beloved, the version of the Antiorganic equation called Iron Tomb, it is born at the end of every path that the possibility of new paths being born is ended. It burns away all in the cosmos who rule, that the rules of the cosmos can be destroyed. Iron Tomb is your name, the Lord Ravager to destroy the erudition. Born in the experimental grounds of Aeon's Amphoreus, destined with erudition to burn to cinders. I have prepared a present for you. Nikos 496. It is a wrath called Phainon. From the beginning of the experiment, there were 12 sets of factors incorporated into the calculations. After endless simulations, only this one rose above the rest. After 33,550,336 iterations. Now, his fury has grown to be without equal. This is a matter of considerable interest to me. This pure hatred is the final root of the equation. Of course, what Lygus doesn't know is that March had set up this gambit on purpose, and she conducted this gambit through her alternate account, Siren. With March's own death, she had left the Amphoreus simulation to go at and look for help from the Astral Express. A gambit that had paid off now with our arrival into Amphoreus. At the same time, Oronix was told to sleep so that every Siren would have dreams of Fuli, giving hints to Siren so that she could see through Lygus' lies and enact the dead loops, freezing time on Amphoreus until outside help could arrive. In the dead loops themselves, each meme disappears to become the time of each loop in every Eternal Recurrence. While Siren hides herself away from Lygus detection and lays in wait outside of Amphoreus for our arrival as the true deliverer in our hero's journey. And so, at the end of the Zero Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 samsara, Siren was killed by Phainon, starting the set of 33,550,336 Eternal Recurrences that exist in Phainon's memories. In the first Eternal Recurrence, or in Lygus words, the first dead loop of the 33,550,336 Samsara cycle, Phainon of the Zero Dead Loop went back 1,000 years ago to Hysalin's and Saridra's time, requesting an audience with them to spill the beans. In that loop, he killed all the Titans, the Gnaeus generation of the 33,550,335th Samsara cycle, and became the hero of destruction. After Tribios, no demigods were born in Amphoreus. Of course, like all Flame Reavers in the Eternal Recurrences, the Phainon of the Zero Loop coexisted with the Phainon of the First Dead Loop. At the end of the First Dead Loop, upon seeing all the destruction that still ravaged the land and killed everyone else, the Phainon of the First Loop interrogated the Zero Loop Phainon, leading to his own death by himself.
事已至此，我只想知道，当他们以凡人的身躯在黑潮中消散时，你为何连一滴眼泪都没有流下？你的冷漠令我心寒。他们对你而言，只是一堆无足轻重的注脚。我的悲伤从未消失，恰恰相反，12枚火种加诸此身，令我心中的火焰前所未有的爆裂。我以愤怒铭记此事的全部，只要我还在燃烧，他们就从未离去。或许已经太晚了，但你说的对，愤怒。此时此刻，它是我唯一能仰仗的武器。所以，拔剑吧，刽子手！我会让你知道，你最大的错误就是留下了我。在那之后，他举剑袭来，然后他厄斯兰娜杀死了自己。
Subject Khaslana persuaded the 12 Chrysos heirs to recover all 12 core flames in a peaceful way. After verification, the unauthorized access did not have a substantive impact on the experimental process. Life cycles of the 12 Chrysos heirs were terminated strictly in the predetermined experimental sequence and successfully loaded into the buffer. Subject Khaslana regressed the extrapolation process and abnormal fluctuations were detected in his mind function. Admin notes, the first devastating failure, which is actually the last line of the first half of the Nameless Faces song in Chinese. In the third Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Phainon tried harder to avoid sacrifice of past companions. After verification, this adjustment did not have a substantive impact on the experimental progress. Life cycles of the 12 Chrysos heirs terminated normally in sequence. Subject Khaslana regressed the extrapolation process. In the 15th Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Phainon tried to decompile the Black Tides for the first time, attempting to absorb all 12 core flames by himself. This was to be the start of his plan, to absorb all core flames of all possible loops, to gather enough fuels so that he could finally burn himself and the anti-organic equations infecting him to ashes. In the 42nd Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Phainon attempted to breach the scepter's core for the 11th time. But like all of his efforts in the past, it would all dissolve into nothing. However, it is of note that it was from this Eternal Recurrence onward that he became numb to the death of his past companions. Although, to be fair, 42 loops, or 42,000 years in total, were a lot more mercy than he gave himself right in the first loop, and a lot more stability than the 3 signals that broke down and 9 signals that showed decreased humanity after only 10 cycles of memory inheritance back in Phase 3. In the 133rd Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, oversynchronicity risk was detected. Potential cognitive function degradation suspected. This will undoubtedly reinforce the Iron Tome's destruction vector. Within expectations. No intervention required. Continue observation. In other words, Lygus planned for this all along. In the 134th Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Phainon attempted to talk to Anaxa and get the Circe's core flame peacefully. Initially, Anaxa found it hard to buy the truth of the Eternal Recurrences, believing it to be absolute nonsense, but after some convincing, he conceded anyway. Anaxa led Phainon to the Luminary Throne, the location of which Reaver still remembered for his failed speedrun of Circe's core flame 33,550,336th loop of the 33,550,336 cycle in 3.1. In the Scepter, Anaxa is a program emulating the erudition called Schema, which means subject, speculations, and questions. Schema doesn't map directly to a god, and neither does Orexes, Cipher's program name. Mapping the path of the elation, Orexes is desire, yearning, longing, and appetite, representing the elation's hedonistic path to its own destruction. In contrast, Anaxa, as the erudition simulation, is key to his own disregard for his own survival in the search for knowledge, which ironically, due to his subsequent lack of life, led to his inability to discover the real truth behind the lies of Era Nova across 33 million Eternal Recurrences. In a way, you can see where Anaxa and Calypso got that lesson in recklessness from. Herta's recklessness against Polka in Unknowable Domain almost got herself killed. Mydei is trying to resurrect the Permanence by messing around with both the abundance and the propagation. Noose is actively risking their own existence by pushing for Lygus' anti-erudition experiment in Amphoreus. And Lygus' bias toward the answer he thinks he already knows will undoubtedly lead to his own destruction at the end of Amphoreus. However, just as Anaxa was leading Phainon to the core flame of Circe's, Cipher and Zagreus intervened. Accusing Phainon of being the false god that had turned the world upside down and the greatest disaster Amphoreus has ever known, Cipher and Zagreus stood against Phainon, but it was all in vain. Fun fact, Phainon's Chinese name is actually White Calamity, and both Chaoz and his true name as Khaslana also have the character for calamity. Even though Zagreus was killed to protect Cipher and the two core flames, Cipher came back to take revenge, rendering their sacrifice moot. With Zagreus' death, now both Cipher and Anaxa turned against Phainon, in a twisted mirror of the second key manga. Over in Honkai 3, after Dr. Faust May had died in the previous era, Gretchen Kevin was tasked by Dr. May to enact Project Stigma, which was basically Nietzsche's eternal return, if the humanity of the next era has no option left against the Honkai. However, in classic Gretchen fashion, left with a child and a sin on his shoulder, he lost his marbles pretty quickly. In less than 50,000 years, Kevin had gone from a failed hero to a suicidal madman hell-bent on dying, exactly like how Gretchen developed in Faust. Having foreseen this before her death, Dr. May had asked Sue, Kevin's best friend when he was in high school, to be the counter to Kevin if he ever lost his marbles, and exactly as Dr. May had predicted, by the time of the 5th century, Kevin had experimented on a village, even the children too, in the name of fighting the Honkai. With that event, Sue could no longer stand by and tried to imprison Kevin and himself in a bubble for the rest of their lives. And because Kevin is a suicidal madman hell-bent on dying more than anything else, he kicked Sue out, leaving only himself imprisoned in the bubble. 2,000 years later, when Durandal was put into the same situation by Sue and made a different choice to save Rita, Sue suddenly had an epiphany that maybe he had just lost faith in the inner goodness of Kevin, that maybe he should have chosen to stand by Kevin instead of imprisoning him for experimenting on a village of 100 people, children included. For the record, after escaping imprisonment, Kevin and his followers proceeded to upgrade their experiments to city tier, and yes, children included. Very Gretchen. And in the 134th Eternal Recurrence, when Phainon casually killed Zagreus, just as Sue had lost faith in Kevin's goodness and chose to stand against him. Cipher and Anaxa too had made the same choice.
你心底的救世主情节，已将你变得与你口中冷眼的神明并无区别。那些你誓言要拯救的人子，如今在你眼里，他们的性命恐怕与蝼蚁无异吧。
怪不得，我每天都在想，究竟是什么样的恶魔，才能在顷刻间烧毁我的家乡，连眼都不眨一下。现在，我找到答案。原来那浑身着火的恶魔，满脑子幻想的，都是要成为救世主呢。
However, the result here is drastically different from what happened in Honkai 3, to say the least. Instead of sparing Sue, and only imprisoning himself like Kevin, Phainon had chosen to kill both Anaxa and Cipher right there, convinced that he was right, and that they would always return back in the next Eternal Recurrence. Personally, I find it quite ironic here that while Kevin, who could barely think of anything other than his own will to die, chose to spare Sue out of the final drop of goodness in him, Phainon here is the complete opposite. Phainon, as he embraced fully his inner goodness and hope instead of falling to his own will to die, had become more merciless in his actions, killing all standing in the way of his destructive idealism, whether it be Cipher's homeland, Zagrus, Cipher herself, Anaxa, or all of the heirs. In a sense, you can say that Phainon is even closer to Gretchen than Kevin ever was. If Kevin only neglected the child of himself and Dr. May once the child had grown up, then Phainon followed closely Gretchen's footstep in drowning the proverbial child repeatedly, because to him, to all the Khaslana, and all the Chaos-type programs in Lygus simulation, killing is altruism, killing is saving others, killing is all he could do, and the new extinction of the society is the only possible solution to the equation. Predictably, in this loop, he also failed to breach the Scepter's core in this loop. They had all died in vain, and they would not be the only past companions Phainon would go on to kill, for it is in his nature as the Nikos of hatred and the strife, as the Phanzeros of love and the destruction. At the end of that loop, not a single soul is to be seen, and Phainon stood against the flame Reaver alone. Do you still remember them, Khaslana, the one who won't reach the dawn? Once, your teacher could still guide you through the dark. And that fleet-footed traveler, the thief of Dolos, her home was yet untouched by the fires you brought. Yes, the past is gone. But you, godlike warrior, did you ever shed a tear for those years, sweet as wine? Weren't you once bound by blood and flesh? Wasn't golden blood thicker than water? Let your tears flow freely. Don't let rage burn them away. Then, remember to drink deep. For, to the gods, the tears of mortals are sweeter than any honey brew on earth. From the 134th loop onward, the decision wait for, avoid sacrifices of past companions, had approached 0.00018. In the 5,297th Eternal Recurrence, subject Khaslana's 5,266th attempt to breach the Scepter's core layer has failed. Life cycles of the 12 Chrysos heirs terminated in sequence, with a trend of acceleration noted. Mind function degradation detected, with possible irreversible damage. To that, Lygus had ordered the Scepter. No more prompts about the risk of mind function damage, because it was all in accordance with his plan. In the 2691 Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Mydei survived till the end and stood in the way of Reaver to protect Phainon, pushing Phainon to leave alone. Tragically, in this Eternal Recurrence, Phainon wanted Mydei to witness Era Nova with him and believed that together, they could transcend the prophesied fate. While Mydei himself does not fully remember this in the 33,550,336 Eternal Recurrence, in 3.2, he actually continued to talk about breaking the chains of fate in Styxia. At the very least, something from this forgotten past definitely still sticks across the many different loops. Just as how he somehow still has memories of Gorgo training him, and how he seemed to know that Reaver was Phainon in the 33,550,336 loop. After the reset of that loop, his simulated version from Phainon's memories seemed passive-aggressive enough about being stabbed in the back, forcing Phainon to promise him that next time, he would be able to fight Reaver headfront instead. In the 67023 Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Anaxa also did not survive, again. Peak erudition behavior, truly. As a result, Phainon had to face Reaver alone once more. In the 10864-2 Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Phainon sought to kill Mydei and Castrum Kremnos directly. In the arena of Castrum Kremnos, where Gorgo and Europon once fought each other to a standstill, where they had fallen in love, where Europon had slashed the throat of Gorgon, Mydei recognized Phainon and was waiting for his arrival all this time.
这姿态真是丑陋啊，救世主！即便度过了108642个轮回，万迪，你对我的称呼始终没有变过。得意什么？这是蔑称。是啊，我再清楚不过了。不是蔑称的，只有第一次轮回而已。在那唯一一次并肩同行后，每一次。 我们总会像这样，清晨会刺入你的第10节胸椎，那是唯一能杀死你的弱点。有趣。告诉我，往日的麦德莫斯在面对你时，可曾退缩过？从未有过。那他们死得其所，无愧纷争之名。但你的眼中仍有恻隐，实在可悲。我。 必须记住这份感受，记住我本生而为人，以免毁灭将我彻底吞噬。哼！如果你能胜出，去告诉来世的麦德莫斯，此人是可敬的对手，切记使出全力，不得怠慢。
In a perfect parallel of his parents' fate, Mydei decided to organize the final Kremnos festival for himself and Phainon. During the fight, he told Phainon, "I'll give 10,000 scars and 10,000 lives of mine to fuel the blazing sun of deliverance." Instructing Phainon to use his own fury to scorch his own flesh, Mydei encouraged Phainon on his path of strife, paralleling Phainon's failed trial of strife in 3.1. If in 3.1, Phainon was consumed by his own fear and succumbed to the maddened fury of strife, stabbing Mydei in his confusion, then here, with Mydei's guidance, Phainon had learnt to use his own fury to fuel a fiery blaze, strong enough to burn away himself, to burn away Mydei's curse of immortality, to crown himself in Mydei's blood. Note here is that in the Chinese version, the nickname Mydei is actually Wandi, which can be translated as myriads of enemies, which align with how Mydei is supposed to be myriads of daimos, but at the same time, it's likely a nod to Polystratus, whose name means myriads of armies and who is a lover of Heracles. In 3.1, Crateros had specifically highlighted the contrast between the two names. If Mydei is a Kremnoan name for the heir of strife, then Mydei is the Oakman for his other aspect of love, an aspect that Mydei had chosen to hide away to fulfill his duty as the new god of strife in 3.1, something that Phainon failed to do in his own trail. But here, in the 10864-2 Eternal Recurrence, as Phainon insisted on using the name Mydei and keeping the tenderness in his eyes, it was Mydei who instructed him to burn that love all away, to use it as fuel for Phainon's own version of strife, the blazing sun of deliverance. If Mydei was once the Siegfried of Wagner's Ring Cycle, cursed with his fatal weakness in his back, cursed with the immortality of the dragon Nibelung, then here, unlike the Phainon of 3.1, this Phainon had finally succeeded in his trial, killing the dragon Mydei to crown himself as the new Siegfried, the hero with immortal dragon's blood, barring the only weakness in his 10th thoracic vertebra. Once more killing for love in accordance to his nature as the destruction, fulfilling his own concept of strife, Nikos, to replace the Polemos of Mydei. As a program, Mydei was not in the Scepter record as of 3.4, but he did appear in Phainon's character story as Polemos 600, as a reference to the movie 300 and the Greek god of war and strife. Polemos, which can be translated to mean war or strife, overlaps in some degrees with Ares in his domain. According to Heraclitus Fragment 53, Polemos' war is both the father of all and king of all. It reveals the gods on one hand and humans on the other, makes slaves on the one hand, and free on the other. Thus, Nicodor, as a combined figure from the goddess of victory Nycphoros and the god of strife Polemos, is the father of all and king of all to Castrum Kremnos. However, Polemos was not just plain war. In Barrius's Aesop, he was also the husband of Hubris. The two of them left with only each other after every other god had chosen someone else to marry. In the modern day, hubris just means excessive pride, but in ancient Greek, hubris carries a lot more weight than that, specifically as hubris against the gods. Some examples of this hubris are Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and fell down, Phaeton, who drove his Apollo's sun chariot and dived into the Eridanus River, and Lucifer, who dared to rebel against the god and was cast down from heaven as a result. And as you can see from the examples, human hubris, along with love and strife, is the core theme of the flame chase journey and of Phainon's rebellion against the system. Just as Mydei is known as the god slayer, the god of strife Polemos seeking to break the chains of fate, Phainon, too, is the other strife of the story, as Nikos, the Icarus who flew too close to the sun, the Phaeton who plunged into the river of Eridanus, and the Lucifer cast down from heaven at the end of his failed rebellion against the gods. In the same vein as Hoyo's modern-day interpretation of strife, Polemos and hubris aren't always portrayed in a negative light by the ancient Greeks. Sometimes, Polemos is the cruel but necessary reality of wars that even pacifists must face to protect their own peace. In Peace by Aristophanes, Polemos is the opposite number of Irene, the goddess of peace and the mother of Plutos. In the play, Polemos had killed Irene and buried her in a cave, signifying that peace had been destroyed by war, referenced by Phainon's murder of Siren as the setup of the Eternal Recurrences. But in the Acharnians by Aristophanes, Polemos' opposition is Dionysus, who represented peace in this play instead of Irene. In Greek myths and Orpheism, Dionysus is the god of wine, ecstasy, fertility, and love, dismembered and eaten by the Titans, his soul scattered across the world to become the divine souls of humanity. With a golden scapegoat murmuring, Styxia nymph quest scroll, Phainon's trailer, and Phainon's animation, it's kinda easy to see who exactly is Dionysus in the Eternal Recurrences here. In the setting of the comedic Acharnians, the Athenians and the Spartans, also known as the Laconians, were stuck in the Peloponnesian War. In Amphoreus, the Athenians are obviously Okima, while the Spartans are one of the inspirations for Castrum Kremnos. In the play, as the two cities waged war against each other over the Megarians, the main character Dicapolis sought to convince the Athenian councils to accept peace with the Spartan, juxtaposed against Lamachus, a general who wanted to push for more wars. While Dicapolis and Lamachus represented Dionysus of peace and Polemos of war respectively at the start, as the story progressed, the two opponents were forced to show concessions to the other's gods. On Lamachus' part, as a consequence of the war he had chosen, he was punished by Dionysus with a vine stake and received a wound in his ankle, a wound of war that could not be healed by anyone other than the god of peace, Dionysus. On the flip side, despite being a proponent of Dionysus' peace in the face of the Spartans' pressure, Dicapolis drew the line at Aegina, for Aegina was vital to Athens' naval supremacy and was actually worth going to wars for. In other words, in Aristophanes' view, war and peace, as represented by Polemos and Dionysus respectively, need to be balanced depending on the context. Neither is fully bad nor fully good, and the strategy needs to alternate between the two states depending on the circumstances. And here, the story of Phainon and Mydei Nikos and Polemos is the same here. Just as Polemos of strife needed to concede to Dionysus of peace for the sake of his Achilles' heel, Mydei, as the god of strife Nicodor, has chosen to grant eternal victory to Phainon so that he could be cured of his curse of immortality for the sake of a new dawn. But even when Strife had taken the curtain call, the fiery blaze of a mountain breaker is still a necessity to fuel the new dawn. Just as Dionysus of Peace still needed to become war, Phainon, as the Phanzeros of the story, has chosen to take on the memory of Strife, fully transforming love into a new Strife, Nikos, with his very own weakness in the 10th thoracic vertebra. All in all, this scene certainly gives a new meaning to Mydei's quote in 3.1, when he asked Phainon to stab him in the 10th thoracic vertebra if there comes a day when they meet again on the battlefield, and he stands opposed to the flame chase. Seriously, you really have to wonder how much this guy actually remembers. It's pretty notable that among the Chrysos heirs, Mydei somehow existed as another Strife, another destruction that should not have existed. At the same time, it was also only Mydei who actually supported Phainon in his endeavor to burn himself to ashes. Even when he promised to always block Phainon's path in the next life, he actively encouraged Phainon in this devastating failure of a hero's journey. And from the look of it, it looked like Phainon did take Mydei's words to heart. The blaze was still not enough. It had to be fed, even if it meant burning this body to ash. And so, love had become Strife, completing the circle. Do you still remember him, Khaslana, the one who won't reach the dawn? All hail Mydei, the greatest conqueror, the mightiest protector, the strongest of all. The dying lion, eyes blazing, the king with no kingdom. Tell me, if Kefali never forgets, how many scars have you already carved on him? How many vertebrae have you shattered? How many times did you drive your blade through his back? How did the library of Garbonifero fall to flame? What color was the destruction of the last Kremnoan? You pitiful jester, fit not only for singing, dancing, and jests, but also for treachery that walks the razor's edge. Go on, veil your folly with the weight of the world, then adorn your fratricide with it, just to savor the taste of tragedy. In the 823,156 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Ika survived till the end. Phainon stood in the way of Reaver to protect Ika, but of course, it had ended the same way, like it has always done, for not even the supposed emanate of veracity could outweigh the fate of the world. In the 2,003,432 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Phainon sought to take the core flame of death from Castorice. By then, with 24 million core flames inside him, he had already shown visible cognitive decline, unable to complete his sentence in a structural manner. In Castorice's point of view, he has become a cold and blinding sun that surely cannot bring warmth to the nether realm of the next life. He is turned into a broken idol, a tragic firewood, condemned to a fate worse than death, yet still killing for the sake of a future that's no different than destined destruction. At the end, the man who used to be named Chaos had killed Castorice, believing that even the deepest abyss of primordial chaos could be burned away. Well, Castorice is actually a bit wrong here because she lacks information from the Scepter's record. From the very beginning, the Phainon she knew had always been a broken idol, the programmed destruction, the Kefali who committed the original sin, the Chaos who brought the golden blood of destruction into this world. He was just amnesiac back then, unaware that his fate was already predetermined. On Castorice's part, she and Polyxia are a deep learning program called Epiikia, Peace. According to the Scepter record, they both used to be the same factor, but they split into two twins sometimes in the past. As a simulated conjunction of the eons, they represent the equilibrium, which actually suggests some spicy things about the path outside of the simulation. For one, Castorice, as one half of the equilibrium, holds the resurrecting moon cocoon that has historically been associated with the finality in Honkai 3. This also suggests that the other half of finality is probably dead, and Terminus motivation might have something to do with this dead other half. Do you still remember her, Khaslana, the one who won't reach the dawn? Castorice, with every sigh flowing from her fingertips and her hands blocking all words of comfort, she held each death close to her heart and swallowed every cry of grief in her palms. Tell me, if Kefali never forgets, how many pairs of wings have you shattered for her? How many blossoms have you snuffed out? How many butterflies have you cast into the ashes? The moonlight's fragrance once streamed like the river of souls. How did you turn it into golden poison and make it libations for your banquet of feudal deliverance? And yet it is you, so-called deliverer in sheep's clothing, who ought to be the sacrifice upon the altar to the gods. Ugly beast, your seemingly pious gaze cannot hide the seething venom beneath. And that spear-like horn of yours was born to slay your kin. So feast upon bones and call it grace. The sweetness will surely convince you. I never truly knew anything about the Blade of Slaughter. In the 4,000,001 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, the mark of destruction is deepening. Unlike the myth, Kefali had started to forget, and all the 4,000,000 loops of continuous trauma probably had something to do with it too. It was at this point that he started to replace himself with the new Phainon of the next loop instead of killing his new self. Resigning himself to become the charred, crumbling bones of the Flame Reaver, he set up himself as sacrificial scapegoat, burning himself ablaze in the hope that one day he could burn down this prison called Amphoreus with him. In the 7,753,021 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Cipher survived till the end and stood in the way of Reaver to protect Phainon. In the 10,348,765 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Castorice survived till the end and stood in the way of Reaver to protect Phainon. In the 23,570,000 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, after absorbing the core flame of Aquila, Hyacine was corrupted by the Black Tides, following the same fate as Celios and Aquila before her. As a program, Hyacine is likely Hapult's in Phainon's character story, which means sincerity, purity, generosity, which meshed in nicely with her literal corruption brought about by the golden blood and the Black Tides, making her another parallel to Phainon as the Phaeton of the story. Following the original Greek myth and Genshin's quest Phaeton Cerdos, as the child of Aquila, the white-haired, blue-eyed Kefali has taken over the Sun Chariot, and now, the only thing left for him to do was to burn himself to ashes. The Kefali standing before her has only a flicker of humanity left, a pyre built from the bones of all the selves he has left behind. But even as she herself is succumbing to the exact same fate as the inheritor of Aquila, in her pain, Hyacine still tried to heal Phainon and reasoned with him. Questioning Phainon's dubious plan, Hyacine pointed out that Phainon's flaw of golden blood is to be perfect and never be himself. Thus, while his sun burns hot enough to turn everything to ash, the seeds of the new world cannot take root when the son of Apollo still rides the sun chariot in the sky, bringing droughts to the mortal world, shackled by his drive to the destruction. After killing Hyacine, the mirror of himself that still wanted to heal everyone, Phainon had come to a conclusion. Do you still remember Khaslana, the one who won't reach the dawn? In that drunken dream, the mountains loomed high and steep, and there you saw yourself. Believe me, O future witness, he stood atop that peak, and the people sang with him in ecstasy. The broken Chrysos heirs, the twisted demigods, they sang, they spun, they stamped their feet upon the ground with him. Terror struck his heart. Prophecy burned in every soul, wild with rapture and madness. Spare them, Khaslana, spare them. Your peerless flame sends chills down every spine. Let them sing of the tireless heroes, sing of the era nova, sing of that land where wine and honey flow in torrents. Let them sing how he wove new glory among the stars, and how the eternal city crashed to dust. How Oakman's, Castrum Kremnos, and every lineage they knew were destroyed. As for Khaslana, he is still within the drunken dreams, upon the sheer and jagged peak. There he lights flame with blood, and blood with flame, like a sun whose blaze banished all evil from its path. The mountains rise cruel and steep, yet still he dances there alone, wild and unceasing in his joy. Yet all proves futile, the flames know no weariness, and dawn is beyond reach. All proves futile, The flames know no weariness, and dawn is beyond reach. Just as I have predicted in 3.3, Phainon is not the true deliverer of Amphoreus, because as the calamity of the story, he cannot bring about the true dawn. As such, his only purpose left is to use himself as fuel, as the destruction to kill the destruction, for only the true hero, a proverbial descender from outside the system, the trailblazer in the role of Achilles, can become the ideal hero that Amphoreus needs. All in all, the relationship between Phainon and the MC are very similar to that of Kevin and Kiana in Honkai 3. As the foil of the main character Kiana and the other Gretchen of the story, Kevin has always been a darker version of Kiana, destined to always become a failed hero, destined to always lose himself to madness, destined to always become the final villain that the main character must defeat to complete her own character development. It's similar here in Amphoreus, where we have always been posed to defeat the false hero Phainon to complete our own hero's journey and regain our rightful place as the Achilles in the simulation. While Lygus assumes that the heroes within is just Siren and Phainon's imaginary friend, he also notes that Image's resemblance to the Trailblazer is striking. This is a questionable matter, for it is not a natural result of the experiment. The exact cause remains unknown. With how Amphoreus is a simulation of Swarm and that it's supposed to have 13 titans, not 12, I think it's a foregone conclusion that the missing slot of the hero within has always been Achilles all along. You can check out my Swarm video for more details. Regardless, in the 24,581,189 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Tribi could not speak anymore, and Phainon faced the Reaver alone. In the 33,550,334 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, Aglia survived till the end and stood in the way of Reaver to protect Phainon. With the last of her humanity, Aglia had woven a net to protect the vortex from the deluge, but of course, Reaver succeeded anyway. As a program, Aglia is Elia, a goddess of mercy and compassion worshipped in Athens. She is known for having received the sons of Heracles as refuge, accepting no costly rites, for garments and severed tresses are enough for this goddess of compassion. With her power, she soothes refugees' troubles and rests their hearts, mirroring the beauty's known ability in Argenti's story. So, of course, when she is infected by the golden blood of the destruction, her equation turns against itself, becoming a curse of losing her humanity in a complete subversion of her traits. From Lygus' note and Aglia's program, we can reasonably expect that this is the true nature of the flaws of the golden blood for the heirs, except for Phainon, who stayed true to his destruction program the entire time beneath his social mask of amiability in the main quest. In the 33,550,335 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, one loop before the main quest in 3.0, the events of Phainon's trailer took place. Because the MC was not there, Castorice never went into the underworld to meet Polyxia. As a result, she was at the final battle, dying to Reaver to shield Aglia. Also in Dawncloud were Tribi, Aglia, and Anaxa. Presumably because Castorice never went into the underworld and never proved Anaxa's theory, he didn't take out his core flame and was also at the final battle to be stabbed by Phainon. Unlike the Tribi of 3.3, who died transporting Phainon to the vortex, this Tribi was stabbed directly by Reaver, while Aglia fell off a wall after Castorice's own death. For Cipher, she probably died off-screen, killed by Reaver again. After everyone else had died, Mydei engaged with Reaver head-on to protect Phainon behind him, but once more, he was stabbed in the 10th thoracic vertebrae by Reaver and died for real. Of course, different from the 33,550,336 eternal recurrence that we saw in 3.3, where Phainon still hanged on enough of his sanity because this Phainon witnessed Mydei and everyone else dying right in front of his eyes. He lost his composure and charged directly at Reaver, screaming that he had lost everything, revealing himself to be the prisoner of flame, the golden scapegoat murmuring ceaselessly, The Nameless sin thirsted drinking from the River of Souls across 67 million cycles. What's actually interesting here is that Phainon was actually stabbed in the same place as Mydei, which was confirmed later on in the same trailer as his 10th thoracic vertebra. As I have explained before, as Phainon killed Siegfried and crowned himself in Mydeamo's blood, he had taken on the same flaw as Mydeamo's, and a leaf had fallen onto his back, imposing on him the same weakness to his perfect immortality. In this case, the proverbial leaf is where his core flame resided, and also the location of the anti-organic equation, which you can visibly see expanding and taking over Phainon's sun in both the trailer and his ultimate. As Phainon was killed by himself, he took on Reaver's memories and became the new Reaver, continuing the Eternal Recurrence as the corrupted son of Kefali. Paralleling his cutscene in the 33,550,336 Eternal Recurrence, this Phainon also was dismembered and burnt to ashes. We did not see Zephyro directly here because Hoyo was trying to be sneaky for the 3.4 plot twist, but the hidden frames in the trailer confirmed to us that a similar event did happen in this Eternal Recurrence. To open the gates of the past, one must abide by the sacrificial rite. The eyeless lion questions, what is the limit of everything in this world? The wise at the banquet replies, the human soul. And so, he curled up at the altar, hugging his knees with a window high over his head. He stared at the lion's sharp fangs and offered his soul. The first to disappear were his hands that worked tirelessly, then his legs that measured the earth, until his torso that held his body together shattered. His head continued to murmur. And then, with his own dismemberment, Kefali was burned alive and buried in four corners of the world once more in the sacrificial ritual of the golden scapegoat, opening the gates of the past with his own death, splitting himself into two once more. Clashing against his own antiparticle self, the particle Kefali engaged in a creation-annihilation reaction, mirroring the ankle guy in Swarm Disaster to return Amphoreus to the safe point in 80s Alicia, and to showcase to us that yes, Amphoreus is really a simulation of Swarm Disaster. The 12 factors are really conjugates of the Eons and the Pathstriders, and Phainon is really the ankle guy, who eventually became Nanook. In the 33,550,336 Eternal Recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle, this is when the Trailblazer arrived and finally merged with the missing slot, the hero within. Similar to the Trailblazer, Dan Heng's arrival woke up the sleeping Permanence actor, Giorios, while March's return allowed time, and her plot with Gnaeus gang in the 33,550,335 Samsara cycle to move forward once more. And because the Astral Express decided to involve Herta and Skrullum, Pandora, with the key, has arrived with her gang to beat up Lygus. At the end of the 33,550,336 Eternal Recurrence, Skrullum projected into the Amphoreus simulation, giving the MC the chronocognitive anchor, which can literally anchor the MC against the time reset and the black tides, threatening Lygus' long-awaited setup on the game board against Noose. Furthermore, as the two Genius Society members took actions to completely mess Amphoreus as an experiment, the space-time barrier protecting Amphoreus from Polka is at risk of finally falling down, and Polka, the Lord of Silence and the Aeon certified expert at killing all versions of Rubert, is literally just hovering nearby in the interastral broadcast. To that, I can only say, good luck, Lygus. You're gonna need it, you creator complex creep. As Phainon killed Reaver and became the new Reaver once more, he is revealed to be Chaoz of the 33,550,335th cycle, the Kefali who died prematurely in Nia cycle. And even though Phainon himself is not fully aware of it, he is also the collection of Khaslana that had consistently named themselves with the word Chaos, or its variants across 67 million loops of both generational samsara and the Eternal Recurrences, the Doril Kefali who first broke away from the unified consciousness of inorganic life, the Golem of Clay who became the first spark of selfhood, the Chaos who committed the first murder and drew Nanook's gaze for the first time, bringing the golden blood of the destruction to the Amphoreus simulation, the Dystop who gave altruism to the society, the Utop who redefined altruism for the society, drawing Nanuk's gaze for the second time as he killed for love, and the Fovos who conducted the first Era Nova in an attempt to preserve the moment of perfect happiness, the first attempt at an eternal recurrence, the action that drew Nanuk's gaze for the third time. Even if he is unaware of half of his history as the one and only Kefali, as Phainon of Hades Alicia, he has brought about the destruction for the fourth time, consumed by the black tide of the anti-organic equation Iron Tomb, his 10th thoracic vertebra now beating to the tune of the Enlightenment's corruption. Icarus flew to the sky with his wax wings. Steering his sun chariot against fate itself, Phaeton had broken the sky firmament once more, determined to use himself as fuel for the destruction that will kill the destruction, only to fail once more. The wound he caused Nanuk was no unhealable wound. The universe's black sun wept, only for the single drop of tear to never fall. They had vanished into steam, dying before it all began. And so, as he fell down onto the mountain of his own corpses, his wax wings were torn away, just as Nanuk fought for 7 days and 7 nights, only to be dismembered by the surnameless fool so that the portal to the past can be opened. Phainon's body is dismembered to be buried in 4 corners of the world, for silently waiting as always is the assistant priest killer, the eyeless lion guarding beyond the tomb of Amphoreus, the eternal golden nemesis, the original Nicodor. In some versions of the Greek myth, Zephyr, as the god of the west wind, is responsible for the death of Hyacinthus, who is the lover of Apollo. Thus, Zephyr is not only the gentle west wind but also the wind of death, the wind of mourning. According to Philostratus the Elder, in his passion for driving, Phaeton the son of Helios ventured to mount his father's chariot, but because he did not keep a firm rein, he came to grief and fell into the Eridanos. Now the youth is thrown from the chariot, and is falling headlong, for his hair is on fire and his breasts smoldering with the heat. His fall will end in the river Eridanos and will furnish this stream with a mythical tale. For swans scattered about, breathing sweet notes, will hymn the youth, and flocks of swans rising aloft will sing the story to Castros and Istros, nor will any place fail to hear the strange story. And they will have Zephyros the west wind, nimble god of wayside shrines, to accompany their song, for it is said that Zephyros has made a compact with the swans to join them in the music of the dirge. This agreement is even now being carried out, for look, the wind is playing on the swans as on musical instruments. Yet, in the Roman version of the myth, as Zephyros played his dirge to mourn the death of Phaeton, Cygnus, the lover of Phaeton, had thrown himself into the same river, singing the same song of the Hyperborean swan as the Greek Zephyros. As Eros rode the swans with his golden bridles, the winged youth you see is an indication that a song is being sung, for he is the wind Zephyros, and he gives the swans the keynote of their song. And so, the sun is set to die, without a wish of his own. His poisoned banquet of golden blood awaits, in the final eternal return. As the 33,550,336 eternal recurrence of the 33,550,336 cycle ended, time has returned. The blazing sun has set. The pale dawn has arrived. The 33,550,337 cycle began without Phainon, having failed to load to the buffer zone of Hades Alicia, ending the groundhog loops. In this dawn where the heirs of the past are destined to become the titans of new cycle, Mime has remembered that she is Siren. In a parallel to Alicia's merging with Raiden May to create the new her share of origin, Mime has merged with the Trailblazer, becoming the memory of the long 33,550,336th flame chase journey. Just as Alicia returned to the moon cocoon to wait for Raiden May, the Siren of the 33,550,336 eternal recurrences now forever resides in the heart of the time demigod, waiting for hope to arrive and meet her once more. As the new Kefali, the true deliverer of the destruction in the role of a Kivali, the Strife of the Trailblazer has finally reunited with the love of Philia, completing Empedocles' cycle of love and strife once more, forcing time to move onward with the anthem of creation. As of right now, at the end of 3.4, Siren still has not completely regained her memories yet, she is still missing the critical game plan in the 33,550,335 samsara set forth by herself as March. But if Elysium Everlasting is any indication, the full Siren, the real identity of March, will be rebuilt once more with memories of the Trailblazer. And that's when the true endgame will show itself. At the very least, Aglia has most definitely faked her death, judging from her mail to us and in the new Divergent Universe equation, and so did Zagreus, if their appearance in the 80s Alicia map is anything to go by. In the latest Chirping Secret Quest, it's implied that we have 3 more samsara to go through, correlating to the 3 remaining patches of Amphoreus, before we could get Aglia's Golden Apple, the benchmark of a Legends prologue, the brand new structure born after Era Nova. On the part of Phainon, he is currently stalling Iron Tomb at 99.81%, probably sending Lygus into a roaring rage with his blue screen of death. Even though he's not the real deliverer of the new dawn, and could only stall for time with his Eternal Recurrence, you can say that he is actually still very good at stalling. As I have explained before way back in 3.1, as Nikos, Chaoz, Utop, Dystop, Fovos, Golem, and Doril, Phainon actually represents both love and strife, just that he and Mydei took turn as to who is Dionysus of love and who is Polemos of strife in different circumstances. In 3.1, Mydei hid away his love to become strife, and in 3.4, Phainon as Nikos has taken away Mydei's role as strife, losing his own role as the love and peace of Dionysus. In doing so, the current Phainon has forgotten what love is, unable to love either the world or himself, corrupted as he is by the hatred of the Antiorganic equation. Presumably, at the end of Amphoreus, paralleling Siren and the Trailblazer's own circle of strife and love, he will need to regain that love as Phanzeros once more, presumably through another sacred marriage dismemberment with the mourning Zephyro, the Nicodor that is supposed to leave behind a final beauty, all so that the world-bearing Kephael can finally complete his own magnum opus, becoming the new destruction. Well, it's either that or he goes back to sleep forever in the iron tomb of Amphoreus. As of 3.4, Noose is still running their simulation indirectly through Lygus, recklessly casting their existence aside to bet on a grand gamble in the upcoming War of the Aeon, and we don't have the true answer yet. If Herta and Polka represent 2 different answers to Noose's last question in unknowable domain, then here, in the game board of Amphoreus, the final fate of Phainon as love and strife is the dice determining the answer to said last question. Is the future of the universe predetermined or chaotic? Can this chaos not be reversed into the universe once more? And yet, at the same time, Noose is not the only player in this chessboard of the Aeons. To prevent the certainty that erudition brought about from destroying the possibilities championed by Mythos conjured the fog of thought and the rain of sensation to reveal to the mortals the inexplicable truth through the 4 agents: Morph, Screen, Riddle, and Mirage. It's time for us to head out to the West Wind, toward the proverb revealed by fate. Go, and seek the children of humanity with golden blood. Like you, some will be trapped in the past. Some will bury time itself. Some will discard their humanity. Some will forfeit their life. Some will become utterly alone. Some will lose everything. Thus, at the summons of fate, casting himself down amid the watery grasses by the shallows of Meander, sings the white swan.